The wind carried secrets across windy mesa, whispering tales of a warrior who had turned his back on the world. For 10 years, Lone Elk had lived in solitude, his heart hardened by grief, his spirit bound by an ancient vow. The people spoke of him in hushed tones, the last of his band, a ghost among the living. His days passed in silent ritual, his nights in memories of those he had lost. But fate has a way of finding even those who wish to remain hidden. As dawn broke across the sacred mountains, a young woman named Rainflower knelt at his threshold, her eyes holding both hope and desperation. Could this healing songstress be the one to break through walls built over a decade of isolation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lone Elk stood in his doorway, the morning light casting long shadows across the weathered planks of his dwelling. The bone wind chimes hanging from the eaves rattled softly, fragments of weapons once carried by his fallen band, now guardians of his solitude. His dark eyes studied the young woman kneeling before him, her head bowed in respect, her long black hair falling forward to hide her face. "Rise," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "No one kneels at my door." Rainflower lifted her head, revealing a face both beautiful and weary. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her copper skin was drawn tight with exhaustion. Still, there was strength in her gaze as she stood, clutching a small medicine pouch to her chest. "I seek the one called Lone Elk," she said, her voice melodic despite her obvious fatigue. "The last warrior of the Ghost Band." "That name is no longer spoken," he replied, his jaw tightening. "The Ghost Band is gone. I am just a man who wishes to be left in peace." "Peace is what I seek for my people as well," she said, taking a step forward. "I am Rainflower of the River People. Our village lies 3 days' journey west of here. We are dying." Lone Elk's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered in his eyes. "Many die. It is the way of all things." "Not like this," she insisted, opening the medicine pouch and showing him its contents: herbs, roots, and sacred items carefully arranged. "A fever burns through our village. It comes suddenly, with no warning. The sick burn with heat for 3 days, then their skin turns cold as stone. By the 5th day, they are gone. Your people have healers," he said, turning away from her. "I have no medicine to offer." "Our healers have tried everything," Rainflower said, following him inside without invitation. The audacity of it made him turn, a flash of anger crossing his face, but she continued undeterred. "The sacred herbs fail. The healing songs bring no relief. The fever consumes the young and the old alike." The interior of Lone Elk's dwelling was sparse, a fire pit in the center, furs for sleeping against one wall, weapons and tools hanging neatly on another. A single wooden stool sat beside the fire, and a pot of water hung from a tripod above. The cold ashes. Rainflower took it all in with a quick glance, then returned her attention to the warrior. "Why come to me?" Lone Elk asked, crossing his arms. "I am no healer. In my dreams, the spirits showed me a solitary warrior atop windy mesa," she explained. "They showed me the bone chimes at your door. They told me you hold knowledge that can save my people." Lone Elk scoffed. "Dreams are not to be trusted." "These were not ordinary dreams," Rainflower insisted. "They came 3 nights in succession, each one clearer than the last. On the 3rd night, I saw your face." She paused, then added softly, "I saw what happened to your people." His reaction was immediate and fierce. He stepped toward her, his face darkening with anger. "You know nothing of my people or what happened to them." Instead of retreating, Rainflower opened her medicine pouch and withdrew a small, smooth stone, painted with symbols. "This belonged to your band's healer, did it not?" Lone Elk stared at the stone, his anger giving way to shock. The painted markings were unmistakable medicine symbols, known only to the ghost band's healer, his mother's sister. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It came to our village 10 summers ago, carried by a trader who found it in the desert," she explained. "Our shaman recognized its power and kept it safe. When the fever began, the stone grew warm. It led me to you." Lone Elk turned away, moving to the fire pit. He knelt and began arranging kindling, his movements precise and controlled. "I made a vow," he said after a long silence. "When my people were taken from this world, I vowed to live apart from others, to keep their memory alive through solitude and prayer. And you have honored that vow for 10 years, Rainflower acknowledged. But perhaps the spirits have sent me to release you from it." He struck flint against steel, sending sparks into the dry kindling. As flames began to lick upward, he spoke without looking at her. "Your journey was wasted. Return to your people. Tell them to seek help elsewhere." Instead of arguing, Rainflower knelt beside the fire. From her pouch, she took a pinch of herbs and cast them into the flames. A sweet, pungent scent filled the dwelling. Then she began to sing. Her voice started soft, barely audible above the crackling fire, but it grew stronger with each note. The melody was unlike anything Lone Elk had heard before, part prayer, part lament, part healing chant. It seemed to fill the small space, vibrating in the air around them. As she sang, memories surfaced in Lone Elk's mind, unbidden and powerful. His mother's smile as she taught him to track deer. His father's strong hands guiding his own as he learned to shape an arrow. The laughter of children as they raced through summer fields. The proud faces of elders as they shared ancient stories around the night fire. When Rainflower's song ended, the silence felt heavy. Lone Elk realized his cheeks were wet. "Our people shared knowledge once," she said quietly. "The river people." And the ghost band traded medicines and songs for generations. "The elders still speak of how your healers could draw poison from wounds with sacred smoke. How your warriors could withstand the desert heat when others would fall. Those secrets died with my people," Lone Elk said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not all of them," Rainflower countered. "You carry them here." She touched her fingertips to her heart, then to her head. In memory and in blood, the fire had grown stronger, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the dwelling. Outside, the bone wind chimes rattled more insistently as the wind picked. "Up, stay the night," Lone Elk said at last. "Rest and eat. In the morning, you will return to your people with my blessing, but without me." Rainflower nodded, accepting the small victory. "Thank you for your hospitality." As she settled by the fire, Lone Elk moved to the doorway, looking out at the vast expanse of mesa and sky. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the clouds in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere to the west lay the river people's village. Filled with the dying and the desperate. In his mind, he heard his father's voice. A warrior's duty is to protect the weak, to stand against threats no others can face. Was this fever such a threat? Was this young woman's arrival more than mere chance? Lone Elk closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his vow pressing against the stirring of something long dormant within him, a sense of purpose beyond solitary remembrance. Behind him, Rainflower began humming softly, a melody that seemed to speak directly to the restless spirits that had been his only companions for 10 long years. Dawn had not yet broken when Lone Elk rose from his sleeping furs. He moved silently about his dwelling, careful not to wake the young woman curled near the dying embers of the fire. Rainflower slept deeply, her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of exhaustion. Finally answered. Lone Elk watched her. For a moment, struck by how vulnerable she appeared in sleep. The determination that had marked her features the previous day had softened. revealing a youthfulness he hadn't fully noticed. She couldn't be more than 20 summers, he thought. Yet she had traveled alone through dangerous lands to seek his help. Turning away, he busied himself preparing a simple morning meal. He took dried venison from a pouch, hanging from the ceiling beams, and placed it in a wooden bowl with wild onions and pine nuts. As he worked, his gaze kept drifting to the wall where his war shield hung. The faded shield bore the markings of the Ghost Band, a circle of white handprints surrounding the silhouette of an elk standing against a blood-red sun. The paint had dimmed with time, but the power of the symbols remained. Each handprint represented a warrior of his band, pressed onto the shield during the ceremony when he had been named war leader. Now they were like ghostly accusations, reminders of his failure to protect them. 10 years ago, as summer waned into autumn, the Ghost Band had made camp in the shadow of Thunderhead Mountain. They were few in number, only 28 souls, but rich in tradition and skill. Lone Elk had been their youngest war leader in memory, chosen for his courage and wisdom beyond his years. His father, Strong Bow, had stepped aside with pride to see his son take up the mantle of leadership. That night, as the band slept, raiders came. Not enemy tribesmen as one might expect, but white men with faces blackened by soot and hearts darkened by greed. They sought the sacred caves where the Ghost Band had stored their medicine bundles and ancient artifacts, treasures beyond price to his people, but merely curious trinkets to sell for the white men. Lone Elk had awakened to screams and the acrid smell of gunpowder. He had fought with all the skill and fury of his training, killing 3 raiders before taking a bullet in his shoulder. The wound had not stopped him. He continued fighting, until a blow to his head left him senseless. When he awoke with the dawn, the camp was silent save for the buzzing of flies. His people lay scattered like broken dolls, their blood soaking into the earth. Men, women, children, none had been spared. The raiders had taken what they wanted and left death in their wake. Among the dead were his father, his mother, his young sister, and his promised bride, Morning Star. He had found her body last, partially hidden beneath an overturned cooking pot, as if she had tried to shield herself from the violence. Her eyes had been open, staring at nothing, her hand clutching a small doll she had been making for Lone Elk's sister. For 3 days, Lone Elk had sat among the dead, unable to move, unable to weep, his mind fracturing under the weight of grief. On the 4th day, he had risen and begun the task of burying his people. Alone, he dug graves and performed the sacred rites, sending each soul on its journey to the spirit world. When the last grave was filled, he had gathered what remained of the band's possessions and made his way to Windy Mesa, a place sacred to his ancestors. There, he had built his solitary dwelling and made his vow to live apart from all others, to keep the memory of the Ghost Band alive through prayer and ritual, to never again lead people who would die under his protection. The sound of movement pulled Lone Elk from his dark memories. Rainflower was sitting up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked around, momentarily disoriented, then her gaze settled on him. "You were speaking in your sleep," she said, her voice still husky from rest. Lone Elk frowned. "What did I say?" "Names," Rainflower replied, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "Many names, spoken with sorrow." He turned away, uncomfortable with the thought that his private grief had been witnessed. "I have prepared food," he said, gesturing to the wooden bowl. Rainflower approached, accepting the offering with a small nod of thanks. As she ate, her eyes wandered around the dwelling, taking in details she had missed in the dimness of the previous evening. Her gaze lingered on the shield. "The Ghost Band," she said softly. "My grandfather spoke of them with great respect. He said they were fierce in battle, but generous in peace." "Your grandfather knew my people?" Lone Elk asked, unable to hide his surprise. He traded with them many times, she confirmed. He was called Swift River. The name struck Lone Elk like a physical blow. Swift River had indeed been a friend to the Ghost Band, a respected trader from the river people, who had always dealt fairly and often shared meals at their fire. I remember him, Lone Elk admitted. A tall man with a scar across his chin. Rainflower smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. Yes, from a bear attack in his youth. He passed to the spirit world 3 winters ago, but he spoke often of the Ghost Band. He mourned when news came of their fate. How did your people learn what happened? Lone Elk asked, his voice tight. A hunter found the burial site, she explained. He recognized the sacred markers and brought word to our village. Grandfather led a party to the place to perform the river people's death songs for your band. She paused, watching his face carefully. They found no trace of you among the dead and hoped you had survived. Lone Elk stood abruptly, moving to the shield on the wall. He touched it with reverent fingers, tracing the outline of the elk silhouette. I alone lived, he said, his back to her. I alone failed them. One warrior against many is not failure. Rainflower said gently. Survival is not betrayal. Lone Elk's shoulders stiffened. You speak of things you do not understand. Then help me understand, she challenged, rising to stand behind him. Tell me why the last warrior of a respected band hides on a mountaintop instead of seeking vengeance or building a new life. I made a vow, he repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. To whom? Rainflower pressed. The dead do not need your solitude. They need your strength to continue their legacy. Lone Elk turned to face her, anger flashing in his dark eyes. And what would you know of legacy, young one? What burden do you carry that gives you the right to question my choices? Instead of retreating from his anger, Rainflower met his gaze steadily. I carry the lives of my people in my hands, she said. Every day they grow weaker, while I stand helpless before them. I have tried every remedy, sung every healing song, prayed to every spirit. Nothing helps. Her voice broke slightly. Yesterday, before I left to find you, the fever took my little brother. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Lone Elk's anger drained away, replaced by a reluctant sympathy. I am sorry for your loss, he said formally. May his spirit find the good path. His journey is not complete, Rain. Flower said, a new intensity in her voice. The shaman says those taken by this fever wander lost between worlds. They cannot find the path to the ancestors. She stepped closer, close enough that Lone Elk could see flecks of amber in her dark eyes. This is not a natural sickness. It carries the mark of dark medicine. Lone Elk frowned. Dark medicine? You suspect an enemy shaman? I suspect something worse, she replied. Something that may be connected to your past as well as our future. Before she could explain further, a sound from outside caught there. Attention, the distant cry of an eagle, followed by the rattling of the bone wind chimes stirred by a sudden gust. Lone Elk moved to the doorway, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. The morning sun had just crested the eastern mountains, bathing the mesa in golden light. Nothing appeared out of place, yet he felt a prickling at the back of his neck, an instinctive warning of unseen danger. We should continue this discussion. On the trail, he said, the words escaping before he had fully formed the decision. If what you say is true, there is no time to waste. Rainflower's expression brightened with hope. And you will help my people? Lone Elk returned to the shield and lifted it from its hanging place. The weight of it felt both familiar and strange in his hands, like greeting an old friend who had changed beyond recognition. I will listen to what your elders have to say, he said carefully. I make no promises beyond that. It was enough for Rainflower. She quickly gathered her few possessions, securing her medicine pouch at her waist. Lone Elk took down weapons that had hung unused for too long a knife with. An antler handle, a bow of curved juniper wood, a quiver of arrows fletched with eagle feathers. Each item awakened muscle memories of a life he had set aside, a self he had tried to forget. As he prepared to leave the dwelling that had been his sanctuary and his prison for 10 years. Lone Elk touched the bone wind chimes one last time. Do not break my vow," he whispered to the spirits of his ancestors. "I only seek to understand if there is a connection between the fate of my people and the suffering of the riverband. Guide my path and keep my heart strong." The chimes rattled in response, their hollow sounds like distant voices carried on the wind. The mesa awakened slowly as Lone Elk performed his morning ritual at the edge of the cliff. The rising sun painted the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and gold, burning away the night's chill. He stood bare-chested despite the cool air, arms outstretched to the 4 directions, his deep voice carrying ancient prayers into the wind. Rainflower watched from a respectful distance, understanding the sacred nature of his communion with the spirits. She had risen early, preparing herself for the journey ahead by washing in the small spring behind Lone Elk's dwelling and rebraiding her long hair with practiced fingers. When Lone Elk completed his prayers, he turned to find her holding out a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "What is this?" he asked, his expression guarded as always. "Something I was instructed to give you if you agreed to help," she explained, placing the bundle in his hands. Lone Elk unwrapped the deerskin carefully. Inside lay a single eagle feather, its shaft adorned with intricate beadwork in patterns. He recognized immediately the mark of Swift River's family. A small piece of polished turquoise was secured at the base, signifying a life debt unpaid. "Your grandfather gave this to me?" Lone Elk asked, his voice hushed with reverence. Rainflower shook her head, not directly. "Before he passed to the spirit world, he entrusted it to our shaman with instructions that it should be given to you if you are ever found." Lone Elk closed his eyes, memories washing over him. He had been barely 16 summers when he first led a hunting party into the high country. A sudden storm had separated him from the others, and he had found himself lost in unfamiliar territory. As darkness fell, injured from a fall and disoriented by the driving rain, he had stumbled upon Swift River's camp that the trader from the river people had taken him in without question, treating his wounds and sharing his food. When the storm cleared 2 days later, Swift River had guided him back to the ghost band's territory, refusing any payment for his aid. "A life freely given needs no repayment," Swift River had said. "But should you ever find yourself able to help my people, know that you would honor me by doing so." Lone Elk had fashioned this very token afterward, an eagle feather with turquoise, the traditional symbol of a life debt, and had intended to present it to Swift River when next their paths crossed. But seasons had turned, and the opportunity never came. "I never knew he carried this," Lone Elk said softly, running his thumb over the smooth turquoise. He spoke often of the young warrior who crafted such a fine token, Rainflower replied. He said it showed unusual wisdom and honor in one so young. Lone Elk secured the feather at his waist, its meaning clear. This was more than a request for aid. It was the fulfillment of a promise made long ago, a circle finally completing. "We should prepare to leave," he said, his voice stronger now, more resolved. "The journey to your village will take 3 days if we move quickly." They worked together in companionable silence, gathering supplies for the journey. Lone Elk packed dried meat, pine nuts, and flatbread into a small travel pouch. He filled water skins from the spring and checked his weapons with practiced hands, testing the edge of his knife and the tension of his bowstring. Rainflower watched him with growing respect, noting the efficiency of his movements and the careful attention he paid to each task. Despite 10 years of solitude, the warrior's skills remained sharp. You expected to leave your mesa one day, she observed, gesturing to his well-maintained weapons. A faint smile crossed Lone Elk's face, gone almost before it appeared. A warrior remains prepared, even in solitude. As the sun climbed higher, Lone Elk made one final circuit of his dwelling. He secured the door against weather and animals, though he took little from inside. His most precious possessions, his weapons, the eagle feather token, and his father's medicine pouch were already on his person. Before departing, he knelt at the eastern edge of the mesa, scooping a handful of red earth into a small leather pouch which he tied securely around his neck. To carry the spirit of this place with me, he explained when he caught Rainflower watching, and to remind me where I belong. She nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture. May it guide your return when our task is complete. They descended the mesa by a narrow, winding path known only to Lone Elk. The trail would have been invisible to untrained eyes, marked by subtle signs, a cairn of small stones here, a bent branch there. Rainflower followed carefully, placing her feet exactly where Lone Elk placed his, respecting both his knowledge and the sacred nature of the path. By midday, they had reached the valley floor and stood at the edge of a vast expanse of desert and scattered juniper. The distant mountains that marked the territory of the river people were barely visible on the horizon, shimmering in the heat. We will follow the old trading path, Lone Elk decided, pointing to a barely discernible track leading westward. It will take us through Shadow Canyon, but it is the fastest route. Rainflower's expression grew troubled. Shadow Canyon is said to be haunted by restless spirits. Our hunters avoid it, especially since the fever began. All places hold spirits. Lone Elk replied. The question is whether they wish us harm or simply to be remembered. He studied her face, noting her concern. Are you afraid? Not for myself, she answered honestly. But I carry the hopes of my people. I cannot fail them. Lone Elk nodded, respecting her candor. We will be cautious. I know the proper offerings to make at the canyon's entrance. They walked in silence, for a time, finding a rhythm together, despite their different heights and gaits. Lone Elk moved with the measured pace of a hunter, alert to every sound and movement around them. Rainflower matched him step for step, her own awareness complementing his where he watched for danger. She noticed the healing plants they passed, occasionally stopping to gather a leaf or root for her medicine pouch. As the afternoon waned, Lone Elk found himself studying his companion with growing curiosity. She was unlike any woman he had known among his own people, forthright in her speech, confident in her movements, carrying herself with the dignity of one much older. How did you become a healer? He asked, breaking the long silence between them. Rainflower glanced at him, surprise evident in her expression, perhaps at his interest, perhaps at the question itself. I did not choose the healing path, she replied after a moment. It chose me. She touched her medicine pouch absently, a habitual gesture. When I was a child, I fell ill with a fever that should have taken my life. For 7 days, I walked between worlds, neither living nor dead. On the 8th day, I returned, but changed. Changed how? Lone Elk asked. I could hear the songs of plants, she said simply. I could feel the pain in others' bodies, as if it were my own. The village shaman said the spirits had marked me. A shadow crossed her face. It is both gift and burden. Lone Elk nodded, understanding more than she might have expected. Leadership is similar. The honor comes with responsibility that weighs heavily. Is that why you abandoned it? The question was direct, without judgment. Lone Elk stiffened briefly, then sighed. I did not abandon leadership, he said carefully. I had no one left to lead. The river people would have welcomed you, Rainflower pointed out. Swift River would have offered you a place among us. And brought the shadow of death upon your people? Lone Elk shook his head. The ghost band was destroyed because of me, because I failed to anticipate the raiders, failed to protect my people. You cannot know that your presence would bring harm, Rainflower argued gently. I cannot know that it would not, he countered. My vow was made in grief, yes, but also in wisdom. Some wounds are not meant to heal. Some burdens are not meant to be shared. They crested a small rise, and Lone Elk paused, pointing ahead to where the land dipped into a deep ravine lined with red stone cliffs. Shadow Canyon begins there. We should reach the entrance before sunset and make camp. It is unwise to enter such a place in darkness. As they approached the canyon, the landscape grew increasingly barren. Vegetation thinned until only the hardiest desert plants remained: twisted junipers, resilient cacti, and sparse clumps of greasewood. The silence deepened too, as if even the wind hesitated to enter this sacred and somber place dotted the canyons. Mouth Lone Elk halted. He removed the pouch of red earth from around his neck and took a pinch between his fingers. With reverent movements, he touched the earth to his forehead, lips, and heart, then cast the remaining pinch into the canyon. We seek safe passage, he intoned in the ancient language of his people. We walk with respect for those who came before and those who guard this path. Rainflower watched with quiet appreciation and stepped forward to add her own ritual. From her medicine pouch, she took a small bundle of sage, which she lit with flint and steel. As the fragrant smoke rose, she wafted it toward the canyon with graceful movements of her hands. We come with pure hearts and honorable purpose, she sang softly. Clear our path of darkness, guide our steps with light. Together, they prepared a simple camp just outside the canyon's entrance. Lone Elk built a small fire while Rainflower arranged their sleeping places on opposite sides of the flames. They ate a light meal of dried meat and pine nuts, conserving their supplies for the days ahead. As darkness fell, the fire cast flickering shadows against the canyon walls. The night air grew cool, carrying the distant howl of a coyote and the softer rustling of desert creatures emerging from their daytime hiding places. We should rest, Lone Elk said, banking the fire to keep it burning low through the night. Tomorrow's journey will test our strength. Rainflower nodded, settling onto her blanket. Will you tell me more of your people's ways? The ghost band's traditions are not well known among my people. Lone Elk was silent for so long that Rainflower thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, his deep voice came softly through the darkness. On nights like this, my father would tell stories of our ancestors, he began, the words coming slowly at first, then with greater ease. He would say that the stars are the campfires of those who have gone before us, that they watch over us and guide our paths. We have a similar belief, Rainflower said. Though we say the stars are the eyes of our ancestors, keeping watch while we sleep. Perhaps they are both, Lone Elk suggested, a rare lightness in his tone. Fires for warmth and eyes for wisdom. There, conversation continued in this way, sharing the gentle similarities and differences between their people's beliefs, until Rainflower's responses grew slower and finally ceased as sleep claimed her. Lone Elk remained awake, watching the stars wheel overhead. The eagle feather token at his waist seemed to carry a physical weight beyond its actual substance, a reminder of obligations long deferred. Am I doing the right thing, Father? He whispered to the night sky. Or am I betraying my vow to our people? No answer came from the star-filled heavens, but as a shooting star blazed briefly across the darkness, Lone Elk felt a weight lift slightly from his heart. Perhaps this journey was not a betrayal, but a fulfillment, not of his vow of solitude, but of the deeper oath he had taken as a warrior of the ghost band, to protect those who could not protect themselves. With that thought providing a measure of peace, Lone Elk finally allowed himself to sleep, his hand resting lightly on his knife. His senses still alert to any danger that might approach their camp during the vulnerable hours of darkness. Dawn arrived with a whisper of wind that stirred the ashes of their campfire. Lone Elk was already awake, his body remembering the rhythms of travel despite years of stillness. He watched as the first golden light touched the rim of Shadow Canyon, illuminating the weathered red stone one handspan at a time. Rainflower stirred on the opposite side of the fire, rising with the quiet efficiency of one accustomed to early mornings. She splashed water from a skin onto her face, then combed her fingers through her long black hair before rebraiding it. "The canyon looks different in the light," she observed, gazing at the towering walls ahead of them. Lone Elk nodded. "Shadow Canyon changes with the sun's passage. It is most dangerous at midday, when shadows are shortest and spirits are strongest." From his travel pouch, he withdrew a weathered piece of deerskin, unfolding it carefully to reveal an ancient map. The hide was soft with age, its surface covered with faded marking symbols, lines and small pictographs representing landmarks. "This belonged to my grandfather," he explained, smoothing the map with reverent fingers. "It shows the sacred paths through the canyon lands. Some are safe for travel. Others are meant only for spirit journeys." Rainflower moved closer, her eyes widening at the sight of the map. "I have never seen such detailed markings," she said, her voice hushed with respect. "Our people have similar guides, but nothing so complete." "The Ghost Band were guardians of these lands for many generations," Lone Elk replied, a note of pride in his voice. "My ancestors walked every path, named every spring, knew which places welcomed the living and which belonged to the dead." He traced a thin line that wound through the canyon. "This is the path we will follow. It keeps to high ground where possible and passes 3 water sources." His finger moved to small spiral symbols. "These mark places where we must make offerings to pass safely." Rainflower studied the map intently, committing the route to memory. "And these?" she asked, pointing to areas marked with small handprints. Lone Elk's expression darkened slightly. "Places where the veil between worlds is thin, where those who died violently or with unfinished business may still linger. Like your people," she said softly. His eyes met hers, sharp with sudden emotion. "My people were buried with proper rites. Their spirits walk the star path, not these canyons." Rainflower did not challenge him, but something in her expression suggested she was not entirely convinced. Instead, she helped him fold the map and secure it in his pouch. They broke camp efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence save the small circle of stones that had contained their fire. At the canyon's entrance, they each made brief offerings. Lone Elk placing a pinch of tobacco on a flat stone, Rainflower adding a small bundle of dried herbs. The path into Shadow Canyon narrowed quickly, forcing them to walk single file. Lone Elk led the way, moving with the silent grace of a hunter. Rainflower followed, matching his careful footfalls. The canyon walls rose higher with each step, until the sky above was reduced to a narrow ribbon of blue dot despite the early hour. The air within the canyon held a peculiar stillness, neither warm nor cool. Sounds behaved strangely to their footsteps, sometimes echoing, sometimes swallowed by the stone, as if they had made no noise at all. Lone Elk moved with confidence. Recognizing landmarks, his grandfather had taught him to identify a jutting rock shaped like a hawk's head, a natural arch spanning a side passage. A series of handholds cut into a steep section by Ancestors' long dead dot at the first spiral marking on the map. They paused. Lone Elk knelt beside a small depression in the stone, placing a bright blue bead, a trade item once precious to his people, into the hollow. "For safe passage," he murmured, "and in memory of those who walked here before." Rainflower added a strand of her own hair, carefully plucked and twisted into a tiny braid, "that the guardians may know our scent and allow us to pass." They continued deeper into the canyon, the path occasionally branching. At each fork, Lone Elk consulted the map briefly before choosing their direction. By mid-morning, they had traversed several miles of increasingly difficult terrain, climbing over fallen boulders, skirting deep crevices, and once wading through a shallow stream that flowed mysteriously from the canyon wall, only to disappear into the ground 100 paces later. "Your knowledge of this place is impressive," Rainflower said during a brief rest, "especially for one who has not traveled here in many years." "These paths are in my blood," Lone Elk replied simply. "My father walked them with me when I was barely tall enough to see over the sagebrush. My grandfather did the same with him. And now the last son of the ghost band returns," she observed. Lone Elk's jaw tightened at her words. "Not as a son of the ghost band," he corrected. "That man died with his people. I am merely fulfilling a debt." Rainflower studied him, her expression thoughtful. "Names and titles may change, but blood remains," she said finally. "The eagle does not become a different creature when it loses its flock." Before Lone Elk could respond, a sound echoed through the canyon, the displaced rattle of small stones falling from above. Both froze, eyes scanning the canyon rim. "Wind," Lone Elk suggested, but his hand moved to his knife. "Perhaps," Rainflower agreed, though she too seemed unconvinced. They resumed their journey with heightened vigilance, Lone Elk occasionally pausing to study the ground or listen to the canyon's whispers. By midday, they had reached a wider section, where the walls receded enough to allow a pool of sunlight to touch the canyon floor. Here, a small spring bubbled from between rocks, creating a tiny oasis of greenery in the midst of red stone. "We will rest here and refill our water skins," Lone Elk decided. "The next water is half a day's journey ahead." As Rainflower knelt by the spring, murmuring thanks to the water spirits, Lone Elk made a careful circuit of the area. The soft earth near the spring held impressions that made him frown, footprints, not more than a day old, moving in the same direction they traveled. "We are not alone in the canyon," he said quietly, returning to Rainflower's side. She looked up sharply. "Your people maintained that none but the ghost band knew these paths safely." "That was true once," Lone Elk acknowledged, crouching to examine the tracks more closely. "But much can change in 10 years. The footprints were made by moccasins, not the hard-soled boots of white men. They were deep at the heel with a distinctive wear pattern that nagged at Lone Elk's memory, though he couldn't immediately place why the tracks seemed familiar. "Could it be other travelers from your village?" he asked. "Perhaps sent to find you if you did not return quickly enough?" Rainflower shook her head. "I left with the blessing of the elders, but against the wishes of many. None would have followed me into Shadow Canyon. They fear this place too much." "Then we proceed with greater caution," Lone Elk decided, "and make no fire tonight." They ate a cold meal of dried meat and pine nuts, then refilled their water skins from the spring. Before leaving, each made a small offering of thanks, Lone Elk placing a polished stone from his pouch beside the water, Rainflower adding a pinch of sacred pollen from her medicine bag. The afternoon brought more challenging terrain as the canyon narrowed again, its walls drawing closer like cupped hands. The path steepened, requiring them to climb in some places, using handholds worn smooth by generations of ghost band travelers. At one particularly difficult section, Lone Elk reached back to offer Rainflower his hand. She took it without hesitation, her grip strong and sure as he helped her navigate a narrow ledge. When they reached safer ground, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, the brief contact sending an unexpected warmth through Lone Elk's arm. He released her hand abruptly, uncomfortable with the sensation. It had been 10 years since he had touched another person with anything approaching gentleness. The simple human connection felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "Thank you," Rainflower said simply, either not noticing or tactfully ignoring his discomfort. They pushed on until the canyon walls began to glow with the amber light of approaching sunset. Finding a defensible alcove set back from the main path, they prepared a cold camp for the night. Without a fire, the canyon's chill quickly settled around them, seeping from the stone that had released the day's heat. Rainflower wrapped herself in her blanket, suppressing a shiver. Lone Elk noticed, and after a moment's hesitation, removed his leather outer garment and offered it to her. "The nights in these canyons are colder than you might expect," he said gruffly. "Take this, and leave you to freeze?" she protested. "I cannot accept. I am accustomed to the cold," he insisted. "And we need your healing skills unimpaired by illness." Rainflower accepted the garment with a grateful nod, draping it over her shoulders. "We could share the warmth," she suggested practically. "It would be wiser conservation of heat." Lone Elk stiffened, the idea of such proximity stirring complex emotions he was not prepared to examine. "I will keep watch," he said, moving to the mouth of the alcove. "Rest while you can." As darkness claimed the canyon, sounds changed and multiplied, the soft rustle of night creatures, the distant cry of a hunting owl, and occasionally sounds with no clear source whispers that might have been wind through stone corridors, or something less natural. Rainflower slept fitfully, murmuring in her dreams. Lone Elk remained vigilant, his back against the stone wall, his senses alert to any danger. Above them, stars appeared in the narrow strip of sky visible between canyon walls, their cold light barely penetrating the depths where the travelers rested. In the deepest part of the night, when even the nocturnal creatures had fallen silent, Lone Elk heard it, the unmistakable sound of deliberate movement some distance down the canyon. Stone touching stone in a pattern too regular to be natural, too careful to be an animal. He moved silently to Rainflower's side, placing a gentle hand over her mouth as he woke her. Her eyes opened immediately, alert despite her interrupted. "Sleep. Someone comes," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. "Be still." They waited in frozen silence as the sounds grew closer, then mysteriously ceased. Minutes stretched with only the sound of their controlled breathing disturbing the night. Finally, Lone Elk eased toward the alcove's entrance, knife drawn, and peered into the darkness. The canyon lay still and empty under the starlight, no movement visible in either direction. Yet Lone Elk's instincts told him they were being watched, assessed by unseen eyes. When he returned to Rainflower's side, she gave him a questioning look. "Whatever was there has gone," he whispered, "or is waiting for us to lower our guard." "Or perhaps the canyon spirits test us," she suggested, her voice equally soft. Lone Elk considered this possibility. The Ancient Ones spoke of guardian spirits that took physical form to challenge those who entered sacred places. Perhaps this was such a test. "We will move at first light," he decided. "Stay close to me and be prepared for anything." Rainflower nodded, then surprised him by reaching for his hand in the darkness. "Thank you," she said simply, "for risking this journey with me." Lone Elk did not pull away this time, allowing the small comfort of human contact as they waited for dawn in the heart of Shadow Canyon, both aware that unknown eyes might be watching from the darkness, and that the path ahead held challenges they had yet to face. First light came as a faint lightening of the darkness above them, stars fading, one by one as dawn approached. Lone Elk and Rainflower broke camp quickly and silently, communicating with gestures rather than words. The sense of being watched had not diminished with the night's passing. They resumed their journey, moving with greater caution now. Lone Elk led them through increasingly narrow passages, consulting the map more frequently as the main canyon branched into a complex network of smaller ravines and gullies. At each junction, he studied the ground for signs of their mysterious follower, but the hard stone floor of the canyon held no tracks. By mid-morning, they had reached a section where the canyon widened again, its walls stepped like an immense natural amphitheater. Ancient dwellings were visible in the cliff-face small rooms, carved into the stone by people long vanished. The old ones lived here, Lone Elk explained, his voice hushed with respect. Before my people, before yours. They climbed these walls, like lizards, and stored their food in clay pots sealed with pine pitch. Rainflower gazed up at the abandoned dwellings. We have similar places in our territory. The elders say the old ones left when they angered the rain spirits, and the land grew too dry to support them. My grandfather said they became too numerous, took too much from the land without giving back, Lone Elk replied. The balance was broken, so they had to leave or perish. He led her to a narrow trail that zigzagged up the canyon wall, providing access to the ancient homes. We will rest there, he said, pointing to a larger dwelling set back in a protective alcove. It offers shelter and a vantage point to watch the canyon floor. The climb was steep but manageable, with handholds and footholds cut into the rock face by the old ones centuries before. Rainflower followed Lone Elk's path exactly, placing her feet and hands where his had been. Despite the danger of the ascent, she moved with confidence, impressing Lone Elk with her sure footedness. The dwelling they entered was surprisingly intact, a single room, about 5 paces square, its ceiling blackened by ancient cooking fires, its walls still bearing faded pictographs of hunts and ceremonies. A small window opening provided a commanding view of the canyon floor below, while the entrance was defensible and hidden from casual observation. This was a watchpost, Lone Elk noted, examining the space with an experienced eye. Positioned to guard the approach to their main settlement. Rainflower moved to the back wall, studying the pictographs with interest. These symbols are similar to some our shamans use in healing ceremonies, she observed, tracing a spiral pattern with her fingertip. Lone Elk joined her, examining the ancient markings. The knowledge of the old ones survived in different forms, among different peoples, he agreed. My mother's family were keepers of the healing ways. She could read signs like these as easily as white men read their paper books. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his mother. Rainflower noticed and touched his arm gently. Tell me about her, she encouraged. The dead live on in our memories and stories. For a moment, Lone Elk seemed about to withdraw, to rebuild the walls around his grief. But something in Rainflower's expression, genuine interest, without pity, made him pause. She was called Bright Water, he said slowly, the name feeling strange on his tongue after years of silence. She knew the properties of every plant that grows in the high country. She could set bones with such skill that they healed without stiffness. She sang while she worked, songs that eased pain and calmed fears. She sounds remarkable, Rainflower said softly. I would have liked to learn from her. She would have welcomed you, Lone Elk replied, surprising himself with the certainty of this knowledge. She always said healing knowledge should flow between peoples like water between streams. A comfortable silence fell between them as they shared a simple meal of dried fruit and jerky. Through the small window, they monitored the canyon below, but saw no movement save a hawk circling on thermal currents and the occasional scurrying of small ground animals. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Rainflower removed a small flute from her medicine pouch. The instrument was beautifully crafted from river reed, decorated with intricate burned patterns and hung with 2 small feathers. May I? She asked, gesturing with the flute. Lone Elk hesitated. Sound carries strangely. In these canyons, it might reveal our location, or it might confuse anyone listening, she countered. The echoes can make it difficult to pinpoint the source. After considering her words, Lone Elk nodded. Play softly. Rainflower raised the flute to her lips and began a gentle melody that seemed to rise and fall like the contours of the land around them. The notes were unlike any lone elk had heard before. Not quite a song, not quite a prayer, but something in between that spoke directly to the spirit. As she played, the tension Lone Elk had carried since entering the canyon began to ease. The music seemed to draw out memories he had locked away for years, pleasant ones this time, not the blood-soaked images that usually haunted him. He remembered his mother's smile as she taught him to identify healing plants. He recalled the pride in his father's eyes when he made his first successful hunt. He saw again the faces of his band gathered around evening fires, sharing stories and laughter. When Rainflower finally lowered the flute, Lone Elk was surprised to find wetness on his cheeks. He wiped it away quickly, turning toward the window to hide his emotion. "That was a healing song," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," she acknowledged simply. "One I rarely play. It is meant to bring forgotten joy back to the surface." "Such songs can be dangerous," Lone Elk said. "They weaken a warrior's guard." "Or they remind him why he fights," Rainflower countered gently. "Strength comes in many forms." Lone Elk did not respond, but neither did he object when she began playing again. A different melody, this time slower, deeper, with repeating phrases that seemed to circle back upon themselves, like the path through the canyon. As darkness fell, the dwelling took on a different character. Shadows deepened in the corners, and the faded pictographs seemed to shift and move in the dim light. The temperature dropped rapidly, the stone walls releasing the day's warmth. Rainflower wrapped herself in her blanket, but still shivered slightly. Without speaking, Lone Elk moved to sit beside her, sharing his body heat. They sat with their backs against the wall, shoulders touching, watching the rectangle of the doorway where stars were beginning to appear. "Tell me of your village," Lone Elk said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What kind of place am I journeying to?" Rainflower smiled at the question, perhaps recognizing it as a small but significant shift in his thinking from reluctant guide to invested participant. "Our village lies in a valley between 3 hills," she began, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a storyteller. "A river runs through it, narrow but deep, with pools where children learn to swim in summer, and where the women wash clothes on flat stones. The lodges are arranged in a circle, with the oldest families nearest the central fire pit." As she spoke, painting a picture of her home with words, Lone Elk could almost see it. The sturdy lodges, the gardens of corn and squash, the drying racks for meat and fruit, the central gathering place where councils were held and celebrations conducted. Before the fever came, there was much laughter. Rainflower continued, a note of sadness entering her voice. The children played stick games in the evenings, while the old ones told stories. There was music at every gathering, drums and flutes, and singing voices. And now? Lone Elk prompted, when she fell silent. "Now there is fear," she said simply. Each morning, people looked to their neighbors' lodges, watching for smoke from cooking fires. No smoke means another household has succumbed to the fever. She drew a shaky breath. "When I left, nearly a third of our people were ill, already gone to the spirit world." Lone Elk found himself imagining the scene, the quiet desperation, the helplessness, the gradual emptying of a once vibrant community. It reminded him too much of the aftermath of his own people's massacre, of counting the dead and finding no survivors but himself. "This fever," he said carefully. "You mentioned it might be connected to dark medicine. What makes you believe this?" Rainflower turned slightly to face him, her expression grave in the deepening twilight. "3 signs," she replied. "First, it comes without warning and follows no pattern we can discern, not spreading from person to person as natural sickness does, but striking seemingly at random." She held up a second finger. "Second, those who die from it cannot find the spirit path. Our shaman says their souls remain tethered to their bodies, unable to complete the journey to the ancestor world." "And third?" Lone Elk asked, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air running through him. "The sick speak of the same vision before death," Rainflower said quietly. "They see a figure wearing a mask of human skin, standing beside their sleeping mats. The figure speaks to them in a language they cannot understand, then touches their foreheads with a finger dipped in black paint." Lone Elk went very still. The description awakened something in his memory, a story told by his grandfather, warning about ancient dark medicine practitioners who could separate spirit from body and use the untethered souls to increase their own power. "Skinwalkers," he whispered, using a term white men had learned from other tribes. His people had a different name for these dark beings, one never spoken aloud for fear of summoning them. Rainflower nodded soberly. "Our shaman believes someone has awakened old knowledge that should have remained buried." "But why target your village?" Lone Elk asked. "Such evil usually has purpose behind it, revenge, power, territory." "That is what I hoped you might help us discover," she admitted. The Ghost Band were known for their knowledge of both healing and protective medicine. Your people understood the old dangers better than most. Lone Elk was silent for a long moment, absorbing this new information. If Rainflower's assessment was correct, they faced something far more dangerous than natural illness, a deliberate attack using forbidden spiritual weapons, powers outlawed by every tribe he knew of. The flute, in Rainflower's hands, caught his attention again. "You're playing earlier," he said suddenly. "It affected the spirits here, didn't it? I felt the dwelling change around us." She nodded, pleased by his perception. "The songs can thin the boundary between worlds, making it easier to sense what normally remains hidden." She offered him the flute. "Would you like to learn?" Lone Elk hesitated, then carefully took the instrument. It felt lighter than he expected, warm from her hands, and somehow alive in a way that ordinary objects were not. "I have no gift for music," he warned. "It's not about skill," she explained, shifting to kneel in front of him. "It's about intention. Hold it like this." She positioned his fingers on the smooth reed. "Now breathe into it, not with your lungs alone, but with your spirit." Lone Elk felt foolish, but he brought the flute to his lips and blew gently. The sound that emerged was unstructured but not unpleasant, a low wavering note that seemed to hover in the air between them. "Good," Rainflower encouraged. "Now close your eyes and think of something you've lost that you wish to find again." Without conscious decision, Lone Elk thought of laughter, the simple joy of belonging that he had not experienced since the destruction of his band. As the thought formed, his fingers moved slightly on the flute, changing the pitch of the note. Sound grew stronger, filling the small dwelling with vibrations that seemed to resonate with the very stones around them. Lone Elk kept his eyes closed, falling deeper into the music that was creating itself through him rather than being created by him. A sudden chill against his face made him open his eyes. The dwelling had changed, or rather, his perception of it had changed. The faded pictographs now glowed with a soft blue light, and in the center of the room stood a figure that had not been there before, the translucent form of an old man in ancient clothing, watching them with eyes that held both wisdom and warning. Lone Elk lowered the flute, and the apparition faded, but did not completely disappear. "Do you see him?" he whispered to Rainflower. She nodded, her expression one of respect rather than fear. "One of the old ones? A guardian of this place." The spirit raised a hand, pointing first at Rainflower, then at Lone Elk, then at the canyon outside. The message seemed clear. They were meant to continue their journey. "We have permission to shelter here tonight," Rainflower interpreted, addressing the spirit directly. "We will depart with the morning light, with gratitude for your protection." The apparition seemed satisfied with this, fading further until only a subtle disturbance in the air marked where it had stood. "You have done this before," Lone Elk observed, returning the flute to her with newfound respect. The river people have always honored the old ones, she replied. They protect those who travel with proper respect and pure intentions. As the full darkness of night settled around them, they arranged their sleeping places, still close for warmth, but with the propriety of separate blankets. Lone Elk insisted on taking the first watch, positioning himself near the dwelling entrance, where he could observe both the starlit canyon below and the interior where Rainflower rested. "Wake me at midnight," she instructed. "You need rest as much as I do." Lone Elk agreed, though he had no intention of sleeping deeply in this place of thin boundaries between worlds. As Rainflower's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep, he found himself watching her face in the faint starlight, the curve of her cheek, the slight furrow between her brows that remained even in slumber, the strength evident in her features. Was unlike any woman he had known, carrying responsibility that would have crushed many warriors, yet maintaining a gentle spirit that could commune with ancient guardians and ease pain with music. In another life, another time, he might have Lone Elk cut the thought short, turning his attention back to the canyon below. Such possibilities were not for him. His path had been set 10 years ago among the bodies of his people. This journey was temporary, a debt to be paid, nothing more. Yet, as the night deepened around them, with Rainflower's soft breathing the only sound in the ancient dwelling, Lone Elk could not entirely silence the whisper of his heart, a voice, long forgotten, that spoke of connection, of possibility, of a future that might hold more than solitary. Remembrance. Morning arrived with a gentle touch of light that transformed the ancient dwelling. Sunbeams slanted through the small window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Lone Elk, who had eventually allowed Rainflower to take the second watch, woke instantly to the sound of her soft footsteps. All was quiet, she reported, kneeling beside him. Though twice I felt eyes watching from the canyon below. Lone Elk sat up, immediately alert. Spirit eyes or flesh? Flesh, I believe, she replied. There was weight to the presence. A spirit leaves a different sensation, like cobwebs across the skin, rather than the heaviness of a physical gaze. He nodded, appreciating her precise description. Few people could distinguish so clearly between different types of unseen presences. We should move quickly then. We still have the most difficult section of the canyon ahead. They ate a brief meal of pine nuts and dried berries, then packed their few belongings. Before leaving the dwelling, each made a small offering to the spirit guardian Lone Elk, placing a carved bone bead at the threshold. Rainflower adding a pinch of sacred pollen from her medicine pouch. The descent from the cliff dwelling was more challenging than the climb had been. The morning sun had not yet reached this side of the canyon, leaving the handholds in treacherous shadow. They moved carefully, testing each placement before committing their weight. Once on the canyon floor, Lone Elk conducted a thorough examination of the area. In the soft earth near a clump of greasewood, he found what he had been seeking: fresh tracks, not their own. Someone was here during the night, he confirmed, crouching to study the impressions. A man, moving quietly, wearing moccasins with a distinctive pattern. He traced the edge of one print with his fingertip. The sole is reinforced with a strip of rawhide along the outer edge. Unusual craftsmanship. Rainflower knelt beside him, examining the tracks. "Not from my people," she said with certainty. "We use a different stitching pattern." "Nor mine," Lone Elk agreed, frowning. "Yet something about these seems familiar." He straightened, scanning the canyon walls with renewed vigilance. "We are being tracked deliberately, not merely crossing paths with another traveler. Why would anyone follow us through Shadow Canyon?" Rainflower asked. "Few would risk the spirits that dwell here." "Someone who knows we seek to counter the fever," Lone Elk suggested grimly. "Perhaps the same one who caused it." They continued their journey with heightened awareness, Lone Elk frequently checking behind them and studying the path ahead for signs of ambush. The canyon narrowed again, its walls drawing closer, until in some places they could touch both sides simultaneously. By midday, they had reached a section where a rock slide had partially blocked the path. Carefully, they picked their way across the tumbled boulders. On the far side, Lone Elk suddenly stopped, raising his hand in a signal for silence. Half hidden among the rocks lay a broken arrow. Its shaft was split, but the distinctive markings were still visible, parallel lines of red and black, with a zigzag pattern between them. Lone Elk's expression darkened as he picked it up. "What is it?" Rainflower whispered, noting his reaction. "This arrow bears the markings of the shadow band," he replied, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "A small group that lived in the mountains north of my people's territory. They were known for dark practices that other tribes shunned." "Enemies of your people?" "Uneasy neighbors," Lone Elk clarified. "There was an ancient agreement. They kept to their mountains, we to our valleys. But their shaman, a man called Black Raven, coveted the ghost band's medicine knowledge." His grip tightened on the broken arrow. "My father refused to share our healing ways with those who walked the dark path." "Could this Black Raven be our pursuer?" Rainflower asked, connecting the pieces. Lone Elk shook his head slowly. "Black Raven would be an old man now, if he still lives. And the shadow band was said to have been destroyed by sickness many years ago." He examined the arrow more closely. "This was made recently. The sinew binding is still fresh. The pigments bright. Then someone carries on their traditions," Rainflower concluded, a note of dread in her voice. "So it would seem." Lone Elk tucked the broken arrow into his belt. "We must move faster now. If our pursuer is connected to the shadow band, he will know these canyons nearly as well as I do." They increased their pace, stopping less frequently and speaking only when necessary. The canyon began to change character, the walls growing taller, the floor descending in a gentle slope. The air became cooler and damper, suggesting they were approaching water. By late afternoon, they reached a section where the canyon widened into a natural amphitheater. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, each taller than a man and covered with ancient carvings. "The speaking stones," Lone Elk explained, his voice hushed with reverence. "A sacred place where the old ones came to hear the voices of their ancestors." Rainflower approached the nearest stone, running her fingers lightly over the weathered symbols. "The spirits are strong here," she murmured. "I can feel them pressing close, curious about our presence." "We should not linger," Lone Elk cautioned. "This place is powerful, but exposed. Our pursuer could easily observe us from any of the ledges above." As if summoned by his words, a small cascade of pebbles rattled down from the canyon rim. Both froze, eyes scanning the heights, but saw no movement. "A warning," Rainflower suggested, "or a taunt." Lone Elk nodded grimly. "Either way, we should heed it." They skirted the edge of the stone circle, careful not to walk between the ancient monoliths out of respect for their power. As they reached the far side of the amphitheater, the canyon narrowed again, and the path descended more steeply. The sound reached them before the sight, the soft murmur of flowing water growing steadily louder as they advanced. Soon they emerged onto a ledge overlooking a remarkable scene. The canyon opened into a circular basin, perhaps 100 paces across. A waterfall cascaded from the opposite wall, feeding a deep pool that reflected the late afternoon sky. Lush vegetation surrounded the water, cottonwoods, willows, and thick clusters of reeds. "The hidden lake," Lone Elk said. "We will camp here tonight. The water spirits offer protection to respectful travelers." They descended a narrow path to the basin floor. As they approached the pool, Lone Elk gestured for Rainflower to wait while he circled the water's edge, checking for signs of other visitors. Finding nothing concerning, he returned and led her to a small clearing beneath a cottonwood tree. "This place feels safe," Rainflower observed, setting down her travel pouch with a sigh of relief. "Safer than the open canyon," Lone Elk agreed. "But we will still keep watch through the night." As twilight approached, they prepared a more substantial camp than had been possible the previous nights. Lone Elk decided a small fire would be acceptable, the smoke dispersed by the mist from the waterfall. While he gathered wood, Rainflower collected edible plants to supplement their dwindling supplies: tender cattail shoots, wild onions, and prickly pear fruits. With the fire crackling cheerfully, they shared a meal that tasted all the better for being warm and freshly prepared. The tension of the day's travel gradually eased as darkness settled around them, the waterfall's constant song soothing their alert nerves. "Tomorrow we will leave Shadow Canyon," Lone Elk said, studying the map by firelight. "If we maintain our pace, we should reach your village by the following evening." Rainflower nodded, her expression solemn. "I pray we are not too late. Tell me more about this fever," Lone Elk requested. "The specific symptoms may help identify its cause." She described the progression in detail: the sudden onset of burning heat, followed by vivid dreams and incoherent speech, then the strange cooling of the skin while the internal fire raged on. By the 5th day, most victims slipped away, their bodies growing cold, and still while their spirits remained trapped, unable to complete the journey to the ancestral world. "And the visions of the masked figure, do all the sick see this?" Lone Elk asked. "All who can still speak," Rainflower confirmed. "Some of the children describe it as a shadow with empty eyes. The adults see the mask of skin." She shuddered slightly. "Our shaman says the descriptions match ancient warnings about those who steal souls." Lone Elk was silent for a long moment, considering this information. The broken arrow, the stealthy pursuer, the symptoms of the fever pieces of a puzzle that were beginning to form a disturbing picture. "There were stories among my people," he said finally, "of a forbidden ritual practiced by the Shadow Band in times long past. They called it the binding of spirits." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "It was said that their shamans could capture the souls of the dying and bind them to objects' bones, stones, carved fetishes. These bound spirits were then used to strengthen dark medicine or to torment enemies." Rainflower's eyes widened. "You believe this is happening to my people? Their spirits are being harvested?" "It is one possibility," Lone Elk cautioned. "There may be other explanations. But the connection to the Shadow Band troubles me." He gestured to the broken arrow in his belt. "Someone wants us to know they are watching, and they want us to make this connection. A challenge, then," Rainflower concluded, "or a warning to turn back." "Neither of which we will heed," Lone Elk stated firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Somehow, in the days since Rainflower had appeared at his door, her people's plight had become his concern as well as the fire burned lower. Rainflower moved to the water's edge to perform her evening ritual of washing hands and face. Lone Elk remained by the fire, lost in thought, trying to reconcile his growing commitment to this journey with the vow he had made a decade earlier. A sudden splash and a startled cry from Rainflower broke his reverie. He was on his feet instantly, knife drawn, rushing to the pool's edge. Rainflower stood knee-deep in the water, staring at something floating on the surface. Lone Elk waded in beside her, following her gaze. A small object drifted in the gentle current, a carved wooden fetish in the shape of a bird, its surface stained dark with what could only be blood. "Do not touch it," he warned as Rainflower reached toward the object. "Such things are often poisoned." Using a long stick, he guided the fetish to the shore, then carefully turned it over with the tip of his knife. Symbols were carved into its base, the same markings that had adorned the broken arrow. "It was not here when we arrived," Rainflower said, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. Someone placed it in the water while we talked by the fire. Lone Elk scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, seeing nothing but knowing they were not alone. He grows bolder, he observed grimly, or more desperate to stop us. Why not simply attack if that is his purpose? Rainflower wondered. Why these warnings and signs? Fear, perhaps, Lone Elk suggested, or he plays a game we do not yet understand. He used the stick to push the fetish into a small pouch, careful not to touch it directly. We will show this to your shaman. It may provide insights into the nature of the fever. They returned to the fire, sitting closer together than before, both facing outward toward the darkness. The peaceful atmosphere of the hidden lake had been shattered, replaced by a tense vigilance. I will take first watch, Lone Elk said. Try to rest. Rainflower nodded, though they both knew sleep would not come easily after this discovery. She wrapped herself in her blanket, positioned with her back against the cottonwood trunk. Lone Elk, she said softly after a long silence, I am sorry to have brought this danger to you. He turned to look at her, surprised by the apology. You did not bring it, he corrected. It was already here, waiting. Perhaps it has been waiting for 10 years. He adjusted his grip on his knife, the familiar weight comforting in his hand. If there is indeed a connection between this shadow walker and what happened to my people, then this confrontation was inevitable. Then perhaps the spirits guided me to your door for reasons beyond my understanding, Rainflower suggested. Elk did not dismiss the possibility as he once might have. The ways of the spirits were mysterious, their purposes often revealed only in retrospect. Rest now, he said instead. Tomorrow's journey will require all our strength. As Rainflower settled into an uneasy slumber, Lone Elk maintained his vigil, watching the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. The waterfall continued its endless song, but now it seemed to carry a warning rather than comfort. Something waited in the shadows, something connected to his past, to the destruction of his people, and to the mysterious fever afflicting the river people. For the first time in 10 years, Lone Elk felt the stirring of a purpose beyond mere survival and remembrance. If dark forces had indeed returned, if the Shadow Band's forbidden practices were being revived, then his knowledge and skills might be all that stood between Rainflower's people and destruction. The weight of this realization settled on him, like a mantle not unwelcome, but heavy with responsibility. He glanced at Rainflower's sleeping form, noting the worry that remained etched on her features even in slumber. Whatever danger lay ahead, he would face it not just to repay an old debt, but because it was the right path to walk. As the night deepened around them, Lone Elk renewed his silent commitment to the journey. The vow of solitude that had guided him for 10 years had not been broken, he told himself. It had simply evolved into something new, a vow of protection, of purpose, of action in a world that still needed warriors, willing to stand against the darkness. Dawn broke with an unsettling stillness. No birds sang, no small creatures rustled in the undergrowth surrounding the hidden lake. It was as if the natural world itself was holding its breath, waiting. Lone Elk had maintained his vigil through most of the night, allowing Rainflower only a brief watch before sunrise. Though fatigue pulled at his limbs, his senses remained sharp, honed by years of solitary survival and the growing certainty of danger. We should perform the cleansing ritual before entering the final stretch of the canyon, he said as they broke camp. The boundary between worlds grows thinner ahead. Rainflower nodded, understanding the significance. The last section of Shadow Canyon was known in ancient stories as the Whispering Passage, a place where the spirits of the dead lingered, sometimes speaking to the living who passed through. They approached the lake together, the water mirror still. In the early light, Lone Elk removed a small pouch of red ochre from his belt, mixing a pinch with water in his palm to form a paste. With practiced movements, he drew protection symbols on his forehead, chest, and the backs of his hands. Then, with Rainflower's permission, he marked her, as well a crescent moon on her brow, zigzag lines on her wrists to deflect harmful spirits. Rainflower reciprocated by taking dried sage from her medicine pouch, lighting a small bundle with an ember from their fire. She wafted the fragrant smoke around them both, murmuring prayers in her people's language. The smoke clung to them momentarily before dissipating into the morning air, carrying their intentions upward. "One final element," Lone Elk said, reaching for the pouch containing the carved fetish they had found the previous night. He held it up without opening it. "We must neutralize its influence before proceeding." He instructed Rainflower to gather specific plants growing near the water-bitter root, juniper berries, and a particular red-stemmed moss that clung to the rocks beneath the waterfall. While she did this, he constructed a small stone circle at the lake's edge. When she returned with the plants, he placed them in the center of the circle, then carefully added the pouch containing the fetish. With flint and steel, he struck sparks into the dry juniper, berries, and moss. As flames caught and grew, he began a low chant in his people's language, a purification song passed down through generations of ghost band healers. Rainflower joined her voice to his, their different melodies, weaving together in harmonious counterpoint. As the flames consumed the plants and the pouch, a strange dark smoke rose thicker and blacker than natural fire should produce, moving against the breeze as if drawn by unseen forces. "It fights the cleansing," Rainflower observed, her voice steady despite the unnatural sight. "Then we fight harder," Lone Elk replied, increasing the volume and intensity of his chant. The smoke writhed like a living thing, then suddenly dispersed with a sound like a distant cry of rage. The fire flared brightly for an instant before settling into normal, clean burning flames. "It is done," Lone Elk said, his expression grim but satisfied. "Whatever influence was bound to that fetish has been released. Will our pursuer know?" Rainflower asked, glancing at the canyon walls surrounding them. "Almost certainly," Lone Elk confirmed. "We should move quickly now. He will be angry." They gathered their belongings and set off, following a path that wound around the hidden lake and continued deeper into the canyon. The trail narrowed and began to climb, zigzagging up the canyon wall to a high ledge that offered the only passage forward. As they ascended, the rock beneath their feet changed character from the warm red sandstone of the lower canyon to a darker, older stone veined with white quartz that caught the morning light like embedded stars. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint mineral scent. "We approached the spirit stones," Lone Elk explained, his voice hushed. "An ancient place of power. The old ones arranged rocks in patterns that serve as doorways between worlds." "My grandfather spoke of such places," Rainflower said. He said, "They were neither good nor evil, but dangerous to those who entered unprepared." "Your grandfather was wise," Lone Elk agreed. "The spirit stones must be approached with clear intention and strong heart. Otherwise, one might become lost between worlds." The ledge widened as they reached the top of their climb, opening onto a natural plateau set high in the canyon wall. Before them stood a series of stone arrangements, concentric circles, spirals, and more complex patterns formed from rocks of various sizes. Some were small enough to hold in one hand, others tall as a standing man. All were positioned with obvious purpose, though the meaning of that purpose had been lost to time. "We must cross through the center," Lone Elk said, pointing to a path that wound between the stone patterns. "But first, we make an offering and state our purpose." From his pouch, he took a small carved stone bear, a fetish he had carried since childhood. Placing it at the entrance to the stone pathway, he spoke clearly. "We seek safe passage through the realm of spirits. We walk in balance, with respect for those who came before." Rainflower added her own offering, a small shell filled with pollen. "We ask for guidance and protection on our journey to heal the sick and restore balance. As they stepped onto the path between the stones, the air around them seemed to thicken. Sounds became muted. The wind, their footsteps, even their breathing, grew distant as if heard underwater. The light changed too, taking on an opalescent quality that made shadows sharper and colors more vivid. "Keep to the center of the path," Lone Elk cautioned. "Do not touch the stones. Look only forward, not at whatever you might glimpse from the corner of your eye." They proceeded with measured steps, moving deeper into the stone patterns. Rainflower walked directly behind Lone Elk, her eyes fixed on his back, trusting his guidance. Despite his warning, she could not help but notice movement in her peripheral vision, shifting forms that might have been people, animals, or something else entirely. Halfway through the crossing, Lone Elk stopped abruptly. Before them, the path divided around a single standing stone, shaped roughly like a human figure. Unlike the other stones, this one seemed to vibrate with energy, creating a visual distortion in the air around it. "A guardian," Lone Elk whispered. "We must show ourselves." He stepped forward and placed his hand on his heart, then extended it palm up toward the stone. "I am Lone Elk of the Ghost Band. I seek passage to fulfill a promise and protect the living." The air around the stone shimmered more intensely. Lone Elk gasped, staggering slightly as if struck by an invisible force. His eyes widened, fixed on something Rainflower could not see. "What is it?" she asked, resisting the urge to reach for him. "A vision," he replied, his voice strained. "The massacre. I see it again, but differently." Rainflower watched as emotions played across his face: grief, shock, and then a dawning realization that transformed his expression. "They were not simple raiders," he said, speaking more to himself than to her. "They knew what they sought. The attack was planned, guided by someone who knew our ways, our weaknesses." The stone's vibration intensified, the air around it rippling like heat waves above summer sand. Lone Elk continued to stare, transfixed by visions only he could see. "A figure stands apart from the others," he narrated, his voice hollow. "Watching, erecting, wearing a mask made of—" "No, it cannot be. What do you see?" Rainflower pressed, concerned by his growing distress. "A mask of human skin," Lone Elk whispered. "The same vision your people see before they die from the fever." The revelation hung in the air between them, connecting the tragedy of Lone Elk's past with the present suffering of the river people. Before Rainflower could respond, the guardian stone released Lone Elk from its influence. He stumbled backward, and she caught his arm to steady him. "I understand now," he said, his breathing ragged. "The spirits show me truth I was not ready to see before. The massacre of my people and the fever afflicting yours, they are connected by the same dark hand." Rainflower absorbed this information with grave concern. "Then our journey has greater purpose than I knew when I sought you out." Lone Elk nodded, his expression hardening with renewed determination. "The guardian grants us passage, but demands truth in return. Are you prepared to face what may come?" "I am," she replied without hesitation. They continued past the guardian stone, the path now sloping downward toward the exit from the spirit stones. The strange quality of the air gradually normalized as they approached the boundary of the sacred space. Just before they stepped beyond the final arrangement of stones, however, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble rose from deep within the canyon, growing in volume until small pebbles danced on the path before them. Rainflower looked to Lone Elk in alarm. "Earthquake?" she asked. He shook his head, expression grim. "Something else. Run." They sprinted the final distance, crossing the boundary of the spirit stones just as a section of the canyon wall behind them gave way. Rocks crashed down, obliterating part of the sacred site and blocking the path they had just traveled. Breathing hard, They took shelter beneath an overhanging ledge as dust billowed around them. When it cleared enough to see, Lone Elk surveyed the damage with a troubled expression. "That was no natural rockfall," he said with certainty. "Someone or something tried to trap us among the spirit stones. Our pursuer grows more desperate." Rainflower observed. "Or more confident," Lone Elk countered. "This shows power and knowledge of the canyon's weaknesses. Few could trigger such a collapse in exactly that location." They continued forward with heightened caution, the path now descending steeply toward the canyon floor. As they walked, Lone Elk shared more of what the guardian stone had revealed to him, how the attack on his people had been methodically planned, targeting specific elders who held the ghost band's most sacred knowledge. "The raiders took more than lives," he explained. "They took our medicine bundles, our sacred objects, the physical vessels of our spiritual power. I always believed they sought these things for their value to white collectors, but now I see a darker purpose. The binding of spirits," Rainflower sighed, connecting his earlier explanation to this new information. "Yes," Lone Elk confirmed. "Someone guided those raiders to obtain specific items needed for that forbidden's ritual. And now, 10 years later, the same dark practitioner targets your people. But why wait so long?" Rainflower questioned. "Why my people and not others closer to your former territory?" Lone Elk considered this as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of trail. "Ritual timing, perhaps? Or your people may possess something needed to complete a larger working." He glanced at her. "Did your grandfather bring anything unusual back from his trading journeys with the ghost band?" Rainflower frowned in concentration. "Many things over the years, blankets, tools, medicines, but something specific." Her expression cleared suddenly. "The speaking stone. A small black stone carved with symbols that our shaman keeps in the sacred lodge. Grandfather said it was a gift from your band's healer to cement the friendship between our peoples." "My mother's sister's work," Lone Elk said, recognition in his voice. "The speaking stone was one of 3 sacred objects created by the ghost band's founders. It allows communication with ancestral spirits when properly used." His expression darkened. "In the wrong hands, with the right ritual, it could be used to capture spirits instead." By midday, they had reached the final stretch of Shadow Canyon. The walls began to widen, allowing more light to reach the canyon floor. Vegetation appeared in greater abundance: desert willow, catclaw acacia, and scattered juniper trees clinging to soil pockets among the rocks. They paused beside a small seep spring to refill their water skins and rest briefly. As Rainflower gathered edible plants to supplement their dwindling food supplies, Lone Elk climbed to a vantage point to survey the canyon ahead. What he saw made him drop immediately to a crouch, motioning for Rainflower to take cover. She responded instantly, sliding into the shadow of a boulder. When Lone Elk made his way back to her side, his expression was grave. 4 men on the canyon floor ahead, arranged in positions to intercept travelers. They wear the garb of the shadow band, black headbands, faces painted with ash. "An ambush," Rainflower whispered. "Yes," Lone Elk confirmed. "They know we must pass that way to exit the canyon. Could we climb out?" Rainflower suggested, glancing at the canyon walls. Lone Elk studied the steep sides dubiously. "Possible, but dangerous and slow. We would be exposed during the climb." "Then we must find another path," Rainflower said, determination in her voice. Lone Elk unfolded the ancient map again, studying it intently. After a moment, his finger traced a faint line that branched from the main canyon. "There is another way," he said, "known only to ghost band medicine people. My mother showed it to me once, though I have never traveled it myself." He pointed to a barely visible crack in the canyon wall, about 50 paces ahead. Through there is a passage called the Spirit Walk. It bypasses the main canyon mouth and emerges in the high country beyond. "Why is it known only to healers?" Rainflower asked, sensing there was more to this path than simple geography. Because it passes through places where the living are not normally welcome, Lone Elk explained. My mother said only those with strong medicine and pure intention could walk it safely. Rainflower considered this, then nodded decisively. You carry your mother's blood and knowledge. I am a healer of my people. If any can pass safely, it should be us. Lone Elk looked at her with new respect. Many warriors would hesitate before such a path, yet this young healer faced the prospect with clear-eyed courage. Then we will attempt it, he decided. But first, we must prepare ourselves. They spent the next hour in ritual preparation. Lone Elk used red ochre to renew the protection symbols on their skin, adding new marks specific to spirit journeying. Rainflower prepared a tea from herbs in her medicine pouch plants, known to strengthen the spirit's connection to the body during encounters with the otherworld. As they drank the bitter tea, Lone Elk explained what little he knew of the spirit. Walk. The passage is narrow at first, then opens into a series of small chambers. Each chamber represents a challenge or test. My mother said the nature of these tests varies for each traveler, drawn from their own fears and unresolved conflicts. How do we pass these tests? Rainflower asked. With truth, Lone Elk replied simply. Deception or evasion will trap us there. We must face whatever appears with honesty and acceptance. Rainflower nodded solemnly. Then we must prepare our hearts as well as our bodies. They approached the narrow crack in the canyon wall cautiously, alert for any sign that their movement had been detected by the men waiting in ambush ahead. The opening was barely visible, a shadow among shadows. Easy to miss, unless one knew exactly where to look. Lone Elk, the passage widened suddenly, opening into a roughly circular chamber, perhaps 10 paces across. Unlike the red sandstone of the main canyon, this space was formed of dark basalt that seemed to absorb the little light that filtered in from above. In the center of the chamber stood a circle of small stone figures, crude representations of human forms, each about the height of a hand. They were arranged in a pattern that seemed familiar to Lone Elk, though he couldn't immediately place why. The first challenge, he whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. As they stepped fully into the chamber, a soft glow emanated from the stone figures, casting long shadows across the walls. The air thickened with presence not hostile, but watchful, evaluating. Rainflower gasped softly. They look like people, she said, standing in formation. Lone Elk moved closer, studying the arrangement. Recognition dawned slowly, bringing with it a wave of grief so intense it nearly drove him to his knees. It is the ghost band, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Arranged as they were on the last night, before the massacre. Each figure represents one of my people. The stone figures glowed brighter as he named them, confirming his understanding. At the circle's edge stood a larger figure, separate from the others. And that is me, Lone Elk said, approaching it, standing guard on the night I failed them. The challenge became clear to him then. This chamber forced him to confront his deepest shame, his survival when all others perished, his perceived failure as their protector. Rainflower moved to stand beside him, her presence a silent support. What must you do? She asked gently. Lone Elk knelt before the stone figures, placing his hands on the cool ground. I must speak truth to them, he said, and to myself. He closed his eyes, gathering courage for what came next. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10 years of solitary grief. My people, my family, my heart, he began. For 10 years, I have carried the burden of your deaths and my survival. I have punished myself with solitude, believing I failed you as a warrior and leader. The stone figures glowed steadily, neither diminishing nor increasing in brightness. They were listening, I see now that I could not have prevented what happened, Lone Elk continued, the words painful but necessary. The attack was planned by powers beyond my knowledge, for purposes I am only now beginning to understand. My survival was not cowardice or failure, it was purpose. As he spoke these words, acknowledging a truth he had denied for a decade, the stone figure representing him began to move. It stepped forward from its isolated position at the edge of the circle, rejoining the others. I have lived apart from life, believing it honored your memory, Lone Elk said, his voice growing stronger. But true honor comes from carrying your spirits forward, your courage, your wisdom, your love of life. This I vow to do from this day forward. The stone figures began to glow with increasing intensity, their light shifting from pale white to a warm golden hue. One by one, they began to dissolve, transforming into motes of light that spiraled upward through a shaft in the chamber's ceiling. Lone Elk watched them go, tears streaming freely down his face for the first time since the massacre. Not tears of grief alone, but of release, the beginning of healing for a wound too long left open. When the last light had faded, the chamber seemed darker than before, but the heaviness in the air had lifted. A new opening had appeared in the far wall, beckoning them onward. Rainflower touched Lone Elk's shoulder gently. You honored them well, she said softly. He rose, feeling strangely lightened, despite the emotional intensity of the experience. That was my challenge, he said. Yours may lie ahead. Together they moved toward the new opening, continuing their journey through the spirit walk. Whatever tests remained, they would face them with the truth, the only currency accepted in the realm between worlds. The passage beyond the first chamber narrowed again, forcing them to walk single file through twisting corridors of dark stone. The air grew cooler and damper, carrying hints of mineral scents and something older, the musty perfume of earth, long undisturbed by human presence. Lone Elk led the way, one hand trailing along the wall to maintain his bearings in the diminishing light. Behind him, Rainflower followed closely, her breathing steady despite the oppressive closeness of their surroundings. The next chamber should be ahead, Lone Elk said, his voice hushed yet carrying clearly in the confined space. My mother spoke of 3 challenges on the spirit walk. Did she say what form they might take? Rainflower asked. Only that they reflect what each traveler most needs to face, he replied. For me, it was my guilt over surviving when my people perished. For you, ... He left the thought unfinished, understanding that her challenge would be personal, and perhaps not for him to know beforehand. The passage widened gradually, the ceiling rising until they could stand upright without stooping. Light appeared ahead, not the warm glow of sunlight, but a cooler, bluer illumination that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. They emerged into a second chamber, larger than the first and roughly oval in shape. Unlike the basalt walls of the previous space, this chamber was lined with crystalline formations that captured and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. At its center lay a still pool of water, its surface mirror-smooth and black as night. The seeing pool, Lone Elk said with quiet reverence. My mother described this place. The water showed truths hidden from ordinary sight. Rainflower approached the pool cautiously, kneeling at its edge. Is this my challenge? I believe so, Lone Elk confirmed, remaining a respectful distance behind her. What you see is for you alone, unless you choose to share it. Rainflower nodded, then leaned forward to gaze into the dark waters. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the surface of the pool began to ripple, though no wind disturbed the chamber's still air. Colors swirled beneath the surface, blues, greens, and purples mixing and separating in hypnotic patterns. Lone Elk watched as Rainflower's expression shifted from curiosity to intense focus, then to a pain so profound it transformed her features. Her hands gripped the stone edge of the pool, until her knuckles whitened. Whatever vision the water showed her was clearly not gentle. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by Rainflower's increasingly ragged breathing. Lone Elk fought the urge to approach, to offer comfort or distraction from whatever difficult truth she faced. This was her challenge to meet, just as he had faced his own. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, addressing the images only she could see. "I understand now," she said. "I have carried this burden too long, blaming myself for what I could not change." The pool's surface rippled more intensely, colors swirling faster. "Yes, I am a healer," Rainflower continued, stronger now. "But I cannot save everyone. Some journeys must end. Some pain cannot be cured, only eased." She took a deep breath. "I accept my limitations. They do not diminish my worth or my gifts." As she spoke these words, a single tear fell from her cheek into the pool. The moment it touched the surface, the swirling color stilled, then gradually faded until the water returned to its original obsidian darkness. Rainflower remained kneeling for a moment longer, then rose and turned to Lone Elk. Her eyes held both sorrow and a new clarity. "The pool showed me my brother's death," she explained quietly. "Not the recent one from the fever, but my twin who died when we were children. The illness that marked me as a healer took him instead." Her voice caught slightly. "I have carried guilt that my gift came at the cost of his life. That perhaps the spirits chose wrong, that he would have been the better healer." Lone Elk moved closer, understanding the weight of such a burden. "And now? Now I see that his spirit and mine were always connected. His journey gave purpose to mine." She touched her medicine pouch gently. "He walks with me in every healing I perform." The guilt was unnecessary a weight I added to an already sacred responsibility. Lone Elk nodded, recognizing the parallel to his own revelation in the previous chamber. They were both learning to release burdens carried too long, false responsibilities that had shaped their lives in limiting ways. As if responding to this shared understanding, a new opening appeared in the chamber wall, a narrow archway through which soft light glowed. A path forward had revealed itself. They entered the third passage with renewed purpose, walking side by side where the space allowed. This corridor differed from the previous ones. Its walls were lined with ancient paintings depicting hunts, ceremonies, and battles. The images seemed to move subtly in the corner of their vision, ancient stories playing out in timeless repetition. "These show the history of these lands," Lone Elk observed, recognizing symbols associated with various peoples who had inhabited the region, the Old Ones, the Ghost Band's ancestors, and other tribes whose names had been lost to time. Rainflower studied a particularly detailed panel showing healers gathering plants under a full moon. "Knowledge passed down through generations," she said. "Some preserved, some lost, some forbidden. Like the dark medicine we face now," Lone Elk agreed grimly. The passage gradually widened and brightened, leading them into the third and largest chamber of the Spirit Walk. Unlike the previous spaces, this one was clearly of human construction, a perfectly circular room with a domed ceiling. The walls were covered with cave paintings of exceptional detail and preservation, and at precise intervals stood stone pillars carved with symbols neither of them recognized. In the center of the chamber lay a remarkable sight, a series of ancient paintings spread across the floor in concentric circles. The images depicted a sequence of events: a massacre of a tribal band, the theft of sacred objects, a dark ritual involving captured spirits, and finally, a sickness spreading among a different community. "It's our story," Rainflower set in. "Astonishment. Your people's massacre, the fever attacking mine, it's all here, painted long before these events occurred." Lone Elk knelt to examine the images more closely. "Not a prophecy," he said after careful study. "A warning. These paintings show a ritual that has been attempted before, perhaps many times across generations. He pointed to recurring symbols. In the outermost circle. These are time markers. The ritual follows celestial alignments that occur only once every few generations. Then others have faced this threat before us, Rainflower concluded, and left this knowledge to guide those who would come after. Lone Elk agreed, a new understanding dawning. This is why the Spirit Walk exists not merely as a test, but as a repository of crucial knowledge, preserved for when it would be needed again. They moved carefully around the painted floor, studying the detailed images. Near the center, they found what they sought, a series of panels showing how previous generations had countered the Forbidden's ritual and stopped the spreading sickness. These symbols, Rainflower said, pointing to a particular sequence. They show a countering ritual requiring 3 elements. The speaking stone my grandfather brought to our village, a medicine bundle of specific composition, and ... She hesitated, looking at Lone Elk. Blood of the targeted peoples, he finished, reading the ancient symbols. Both Ghost Band and River People blood, freely given in sacrifice. The final panels showed healers from 2 different tribes, working together to perform a complex ceremony, using the combined elements to cleanse the sickness and release the captured spirits. This is why you survived, Rainflower said softly, and why I was drawn to find you. The ritual cannot be countered by either of our peoples alone. Lone Elk nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. The massacre of my band wasn't just about obtaining sacred objects. It was about eliminating those who could counter the ritual when the proper alignment returned. His expression hardened. Whoever guides our pursuer planned this for years, perhaps decades. But they did not anticipate your survival, Rainflower pointed out, or that our people's connection would remain strong enough for me to seek you out. As they studied the floor paintings more carefully, Lone Elk noticed smaller details, previously overlooked images, showing the specific composition of the medicine bundle needed for the countering ritual, the correct positioning of participants, the proper time alignment with sun and moon. We must remember all of this, he said urgently. Your shaman will need this knowledge. Rainflower removed a small leather pouch from her medicine bag. Inside were pieces of charcoal and a folded square of soft deerskin. With quick practice strokes, she began sketching the key images and symbols onto the hide. My father taught me to capture memories this way, she explained as she worked. I may not be a warrior, but I was trained to observe and record what could not be carried physically. Lone Elk watched with approval as her skilled hands reproduced the essential elements of the ritual images. While she worked, he continued examining the chamber, alert for any sign of the 3rd challenge his mother had mentioned. In the far wall, he discovered a small alcove partially hidden behind one of the stone pillars. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in ancient, deteriorating leather. With careful hands, he lifted it out, sensing its significance immediately. Rainflower, he called softly. I believe I've found something important. She joined him, her sketching complete. Together, they unwrapped the bundle to reveal a set of cave paintings on thin sheets of slate, portable versions of the knowledge displayed on the chamber floor. The old ones created these as a guide, Lone Elk realized, to carry the knowledge out of this sacred place. The slate paintings were remarkably preserved, protected by the dry air of the sealed chamber. Each showed a crucial element of the countering ritual in greater detail than the floor paintings, the precise composition of medicines, the exact words to be spoken, the alignment of ceremonial objects. This is the 3rd challenge, Rainflower said with sudden understanding. Not a test of our character, but of our commitment. Will we accept the responsibility of this knowledge and use it to save my people? Lone Elk met her gaze steadily. I accept, he said without hesitation. This purpose is why I survived when all others fell. And I accept, Rainflower affirmed. This is the healing I was born to perform. As they spoke these words of commitment, the chamber responded. The painted floor began to glow softly, each image illuminated from within, as if acknowledging their pledge. The light grew, spreading up the walls and across the domed ceiling, until the entire space was suffused with a warm golden radiance. A new opening appeared, not a narrow passage like the others, but a broad archway leading upward toward natural light. The spirit walk had accepted their commitment, and now offered them passage back to the world above. Carefully, they wrapped the slate paintings and placed them in Rainflower's larger medicine pouch. These ancient guides, preserved for generations, would now serve their intended purpose to counter the dark. Ritual threatening the river people. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Lone Elk felt a presence not threatening, but watchful. Turning, he saw a faint shimmer in the air near the center of the painted floor. The shimmer coalesced briefly into a recognizable form, a woman with features that mirrored his own, wearing the traditional dress of a ghost band healer. "Mother," he whispered, recognizing her immediately, though she had been dead for 10 years. The apparition smiled, but did not speak. She raised her hand in a gesture of blessing, then pointed deliberately toward the exit and the world beyond. Her message was clear. The time for dwelling in the past was over. His path lay forward, alongside the young healer who had awakened him from a decade of solitary grief. The apparition faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only a lingering sense of peace and purpose. Lone Elk stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the gift of this brief connection. Rainflower, who had also witnessed the visitation, touched his arm gently. "Your mother blesses our journey." "Yes," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion, "and reminds me that the dead are never truly gone while we carry their wisdom forward." Together, they walked through the archway and began ascending a steep natural chimney in the rock. Sunlight filtered down from above, growing stronger with each step they took. After the supernatural atmosphere of the spirit walk chambers, the simple sensations of moving air and natural light felt both foreign and welcome. The climb was challenging, but not impossible, with natural handholds and ledges spaced conveniently along the way. As they neared the top, Lone Elk paused to listen, alert for any sign of their pursuers. Hearing nothing suspicious, he continued upward, emerging finally onto a high plateau overlooking the canyon lands they had traversed. Rainflower followed, blinking in the bright afternoon sunlight after the dimness below. They found themselves on a mesa top covered with juniper and pinyon pine, the wide sky above them a brilliant blue. To the west, the distant mountains that marked the territory of the river people were clearly visible. "We bypassed their ambush," Lone Elk said with satisfaction, scanning the terrain below. From this vantage point, he could see tiny figures moving near the mouth of Shadow Canyon, their pursuers still waiting for prey that would never pass their way. "How far to my village?" "Now?" Rainflower asked, orienting herself to their new position. "A day and a half," Lone Elk estimated. "Less if we travel through the night." "My people may not have that long," she said, concern clouding her features. "The fever was spreading quickly when I left." "Then we move with all possible speed," Lone Elk decided. "The high trail follows this ridge before descending to the valley. It's more exposed, but faster than the lower paths." They paused only long enough to drink from their water skins and consume a handful of dried meat and pine nuts. The knowledge gained in the spirit walk chambers had added urgency to their journey. They now understood not just what threatened the river people, but how to counter it. As they set off along the ridge trail, Lone Elk found himself watching Rainflower with new awareness. She moved with the same quiet determination she had shown since appearing at his door, but now he recognized the depth of strength behind her gentle exterior. She had faced her own demons in the seeing pool, just as he had confronted his, emerging with greater clarity and purpose. More than that, he understood now that their meeting had not been chance, but necessity, two halves of a countering force against an ancient evil that threatened to consume both their peoples. The Ghost Band's massacre and the River People's fever were connected by design, and so too were the survivors meant to unite against their common enemy. With this understanding came a sense of rightness that Lone Elk had not experienced in a decade. His solitary vigil on Windy Mesa had not been meaningless, but neither had it been his final purpose. The vow he had made to honor his dead would be fulfilled not through isolation, but through action, protecting the living who now faced the same threat that had destroyed his bandot as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. They increased their pace, leaving Shadow Canyon and its mysteries behind. Ahead lay the River People's village and a confrontation with the dark practitioner who had orchestrated so much suffering. Armed with ancient knowledge and newfound clarity, they moved forward together, the last warrior of the Ghost Band and the healer of the River People, united by purpose stronger than the grief that had shaped both their lives. They traveled until dusk painted the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The high ridge trail offered faster progress than the canyon paths, but it also left them exposed. Several times, Lone Elk spotted dust clouds in the distance that suggested mounted pursuers had discovered their escape and were now attempting to cut them off before they reached the River People's village. "We should make camp while we still have light," Lone Elk decided as they reached a protected hollow ringed by juniper trees. "Rest for a few hours, then continue under cover of darkness." Rainflower nodded, her fatigue evident despite her determination. They had covered significant ground since emerging from the spirit walk, but the physical and emotional toll of their journey was beginning to show. Neither had slept properly for 2 days, and the spiritual challenges of the spirit walk had drained them further. They prepared a minimal camp, gathering pine boughs for sleeping pallets, but foregoing a fire that might reveal their position. As they shared the last of their dried meat and berries, Lone Elk studied the terrain ahead, planning their night journey. "There is a river crossing at Thunder Bend," he said, pointing to a distant curve in the silver thread of water visible in the valley below. "It's the only safe ford for many miles in either direction." "The Night River," Rainflower confirmed, recognizing the landmark. "The crossing is sacred to my people. We perform water blessings there before major journeys." "Then we will need to be cautious," Lone Elk warned. "Our pursuer may anticipate this route and set another ambush." As darkness settled around them, they took turns resting. Lone Elk insisted Rainflower sleep first, while he kept watch, his senses alert to any unusual sound or movement in the surrounding wilderness. When the moon rose, a slim crescent offering minimal light, he gently woke her for her turn at watch, while he grabbed a few hours of much-needed rest. They resumed their journey, well before dawn, navigating by starlight along the ridge trail. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they started their descent toward the Night River. The path grew steeper, switchbacking down through stands of pinyon pine and scraggly mountain mahogany dot. By mid-morning, they had reached the valley floor. The Night River lay before them, its waters swollen with recent mountain snowmelt. What might have been an easy crossing in late summer was now a formidable barrier, fast-moving water, perhaps 30 paces across, and of uncertain depth. They approached the ford cautiously. Stone markers on both banks indicated the traditional crossing point, where the riverbed was most reliable. Still, the rushing current looked dangerous, the water churning around partially submerged boulders. "We must perform the blessing ritual before crossing," Rainflower said, removing a small wooden bowl from her medicine pouch. "The water spirits must be acknowledged, especially when the river runs high." Lone Elk nodded his agreement. Though not a tradition of his own people, he respected the power of water and the importance of proper spiritual protocols when traversing natural boundaries. Rainflower knelt at the river's edge, filling the shallow wooden bowl with clear water. Into this, she sprinkled pinches of herbs and pollen from her medicine pouch. stirring the mixture with her finger while singing a low, melodic prayer in her people's language. Lone Elk stood guard, scanning both riverbanks and the surrounding terrain for any sign of their pursuers. The valley was quiet save for the river's constant voice and the occasional call of birds. But his warrior's instincts remained on high alert. They were vulnerable here, caught between the fast-flowing water and the open land they had descended from. When Rainflower had completed her preparation, she handed the blessing bowl to Lone Elk. Each who crosses must participate, she explained. Place a drop of water on your forehead, lips, and heart, then pour the remainder back into the river. Lone Elk followed her instructions, feeling a subtle shift in the air around them as he completed the ritual. The river's roar seemed to soften slightly, though its physical power remained unchanged. Now we must cross quickly, Rainflower said. A blessing creates a window of safe passage, but it does not last long. She began removing her outer garments, bundling them with her medicine pouch into a tight package that she secured on top of her head. Lone Elk did the same with his weapons and travel pouch, keeping only his knife strapped to his waist. "I'll go first," he said, testing the water's temperature with one foot. It was shockingly cold, fed by mountain snow that had melted only days before. "The current is strong. Stay directly behind me, using my body as a brake against the flow." Rainflower nodded, her expression determined despite the obvious danger. Together, they waded into the frigid water, moving carefully from one submerged foothold to the next. The blessing ritual seemed to be working, though the current pulled at their legs with considerable force. They maintained their balance and forward progress. Halfway across, where the river ran deepest, the water reached Lone Elk's chest and Rainflower's shoulders. The cold bit into their skin, numbing extremities and making each movement more difficult than the last. Still, they pressed on, focused entirely on the far bank and the promise of safety it offered. 3/4 of the way across, disaster struck. Rainflower's foot slipped on a moss-covered stone, and the current instantly seized her. She disappeared beneath the surface with a startled cry. The bundle containing her medicine pouch, with the precious slate paintings, still clutched atop her head. Lone Elk reacted without thought, diving after her. The river's chill embrace closed around him. As he fought against the powerful current, eyes straining to locate Rainflower in the turbulent water, he caught a glimpse of movement downstream and struck out with powerful strokes, desperation lending him strength beyond normal human capacity. He reached her just as she surfaced, gasping for air, one arm still raised to protect her medicine bundle. With his free arm, Lone Elk caught her around the waist and angled toward the shore, fighting the current that seemed determined to drag them both downstream. His feet found purchase on the riverbed, and with a final surge of effort, he half-carried, half-dragged Rainflower onto the far bank. They collapsed together on the rocky shore, chests heaving, limbs trembling with cold and exertion. The medicine pouch? Rainflower gasped as soon as she could speak. Lone Elk looked to where her hands still clutched the bundle she had protected, even while fighting for her life. The outer wrapping was soaked, but the oiled deerskin of the pouch itself appeared to have kept the contents dry. "Safe," he assured her, his own voice rough from swallowing river water. "You held on." They lay side by side for several minutes, recovering their strength and allowing the morning sun to begin warming their chilled bodies. The near drowning had brought them physically closer than at any previous point in their journey. Rainflower's head rested against Lone Elk's shoulder, his arm still protectively around her waist. Neither seemed inclined to move, the shared danger having broken down barriers that careful courtesy had maintained. Lone Elk became acutely aware of Rainflower's closeness, the rhythm of her breathing, the scent of river water and herbs in her hair, the solid reality of another human being after 10 years of solitude. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. Their wet clothing would soon become dangerous in the cool spring air, and they remained exposed in open territory, with pursuers not far behind. "We should move to the tree line and dry out," Lone Elk said, reluctantly withdrawing his arm and sitting up. Rainflower nodded, equally reluctant to break the moment of connection. They gathered their scattered possessions and made their way to a grove of cottonwood trees about 100 paces from the riverbank. There, partially concealed from casual observation, they spread their outer garments on sun-warmed rocks to dry. Lone Elk built a small, nearly smokeless fire using dry cottonwood, bark, and twigs. The tiny flames provided welcome warmth as they huddled close, wearing only their basic undergarments while their heavier clothing dried. "Thank you," Rainflower said softly after a long, comfortable silence, "for saving my life in the river." Lone Elk shook his head slightly. "No thanks are needed between." He hesitated, uncertain how to define what they had become to each other. More than traveling companions, not quite friends in the ordinary sense. "Between those who walk the same path," he finished. Rainflower's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes," she agreed, "the same path." As they waited for their clothing to dry, Rainflower opened her medicine pouch to check the contents. The slate paintings were indeed safe, their ancient images undamaged by the river crossing. She spread them carefully on a dry stone, examining each one with renewed interest now that they had time to study them properly. "These show the complete countering ritual," she explained, pointing to specific details. "The arrangement of participants, the medicines to be prepared, the songs to be sung." Lone Elk moved closer, studying the images alongside her. "This symbol here," he said, indicating a complex pattern on one of the slate pieces, "represents the speaking stone your grandfather brought to your village. It must be placed at the center of the ritual circle." "And here," Rainflower added, pointing to another image, "the combined blood-offering ghost band and river people together, freely given." The slate paintings confirmed what they had already understood, that countering the dark ritual responsible for the fever required elements from both their peoples, working in harmony. This was why the practitioner had targeted the ghost band. First, eliminating those who held the knowledge that could oppose him. "We should reach my village by nightfall," Rainflower said, gathering the slate paintings and returning them carefully to her pouch. "If we start now." Their clothing had dried enough to be wearable, though still damp in the heavier folds. They dressed quickly, checked their supplies, and extinguished the small fire with handfuls of sand. The remaining journey followed the night river upstream, toward the mountains that cradled the river people's valley. The terrain grew gradually more familiar to Rainflower, who now took the lead, showing Lone Elk game trails and shortcuts known to her people. As they walked, Lone Elk found himself watching Rainflower with growing admiration. Despite the rigors of their journey and the near drowning in the river, she moved with unwavering determination, her focus entirely on reaching her people with the knowledge that might save them. Her strength was different from a warrior's, but no less real, the quiet endurance of one who heals rather than harms, who preserves rather than destroys. By late afternoon, they had entered territory that Rainflower knew intimately. The landscape changed subtly. Carefully tended wild food plants grew in seemingly natural arrangements that Lone Elk recognized as deliberate cultivation. Stone markers appeared occasionally along the path, some decorated with symbols of the river people. "We are within the boundaries of my people's territory," Rainflower explained. "These markers honor the spirits of place and ask their blessing on travelers." Lone Elk noted how her steps quickened now, energized by proximity to home despite her physical exhaustion. His own feelings were more complex: anticipation, mixed with apprehension at the prospect of entering a village, surrounded by people after so many years of isolation. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, They crested a small rise and looked down into a sheltered valley. There lay the river people's village, a cluster of perhaps 30 dwellings arranged in a circular pattern around a central plaza. The night river curved gently around the western edge of the settlement, providing water and protection. Even from a distance, Lone Elk could see that something was wrong. Many of the dwellings showed no signs of activity, no cook fires, no movement of inhabitants. Those that did have smoke rising from smoke holes seemed concentrated on one side of the village. Rain. Flower's face reflected his own concern. The fever has spread further, she said quietly. Many households have fallen silent. They descended toward the village, moving more quickly now despite their fatigue. As they approached the outermost dwellings, a cry went up. They had been spotted. Several figures emerged from the central area, moving toward them with the wary caution of a people under siege by invisible enemies. Rain. Flower raised her arms in the traditional greeting of her people, calling out words of reassurance. The tension visibly eased among the approaching group, who now hurried forward with expressions of relief and welcome. That an elderly man reached them, first tall and straight-backed despite his years, with deep lines etched into his copper face, and long gray hair bound in a single braid. His ceremonial paint marks on his cheeks and forehead identified him as the village shaman. Grandfather. Rainflower greeted him with deep respect, though Lone Elk realized this was a title of position, rather than blood relation. You return when hope had begun to fade, the old man said, embracing her briefly. His sharp eyes moved to Lone Elk, assessing the stranger with the practiced gaze of one accustomed to reading people. And you bring one of the ghost band, as the vision foretold. Lone Elk met the shaman's gaze steadily, noting the wisdom and power evident in the old man's bearing. I am Lone Elk, last warrior of the ghost band, he introduced himself formally. I come to honor an old debt and to help counter the sickness that afflicts your people. The shaman nodded slowly, as if confirming something already known. I am Stone Speaker, keeper of the river people's medicine ways, he replied with equal formality. Your coming was shown to me in smoke visions 3 nights past. More villagers had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the new arrivals. Lone Elk noted their haggard appearance, faces drawn with worry and fatigue, eyes haunted by too much death. These were a people under siege, fighting an enemy they could neither see nor understand. We bring knowledge, Rainflower told Stone. Speaker urgently. Ancient guidance on how to counter the fever and free the trapped spirits. The old shaman's eyes sharpened with interest. Then you must share this wisdom quickly. 7 more have fallen to the fever since your departure. The dying call out to the masked one in their final hours. Rainflower opened her medicine pouch and carefully withdrew the slate paintings. Stone Speaker's breath caught visibly as he recognized the significance. The old one's teachings, he whispered, reverent fingers hovering above but not touching the ancient images. Where did you find these? In the spirit walk through Shadow Canyon, Rainflower explained. They show a countering ritual that requires elements from both our peoples. Stone Speaker nodded slowly, his expression grave. Come, we will discuss this in the medicine lodge, away from fearful ears. He led them toward the center of the village, the gathered crowd parting respectfully before them. As they walked, Lone Elk felt the weight of many curious gazes upon him, the first outsider to enter their village in many moons, and a member of a band long thought extinct. The medicine lodge stood near the village center, a circular structure, larger than the surrounding dwellings, its exterior decorated with painted symbols and prayer offerings. Inside, a fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising to an opening in the domed roof. The walls were lined with storage niches containing bundles of herbs, carved fetishes, and ceremonial implements. Stone Speaker gestured for them to sit on woven mats near the fire. An assistant brought food and water, simple fare of cornbread and dried berries, but welcome after their arduous journey. Only when they had eaten and drunk did the serious discussion begin. Rainflower laid out the slate paintings in sequence, explaining what they had learned in the spirit walk chambers. Lone Elk added his knowledge of the ghost band's medicine ways, connecting ancient symbols to practices he had learned from his mother and aunt. Stone Speaker listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions or offering insights from his own vast knowledge. When they described the blood offering required for the countering ritual, he nodded solemnly. The power of freely given blood has been known to healers since time beyond memory, he confirmed. It carries the essence of life itself, the strength to break harmful bindings. They talked long into the evening, planning the details of the countering ritual. It would require preparation-specific medicines to be gathered and prepared, a ritual space to be cleansed and marked according to the ancient patterns. Most critically, it needed to be performed at the precise time when the dark ritual reached its culmination. Tomorrow night, Stone Speaker determined after consulting a calendar of marked stones, when the crescent moon stands directly over Thunder Mountain. That is when the stars align, as shown in these images. So soon, Rainflower said, concern evident in her voice. Will we have time to prepare everything needed? We must, the old shaman replied simply. The fever accelerates. Those most recently afflicted pass to the spirit world in 3 days rather than 5. The Dark One gains strength with each captured soul. As their planning concluded, Stone Speaker rose with the dignity of his position. Rainflower, you must rest now. Tomorrow will demand all your strength. He turned to Lone Elk. A dwelling has been prepared for you, warrior of the ghost band. Our people honor your presence among us. Lone Elk inclined his head in respectful acknowledgement, though the prospect of sleeping in a dwelling surrounded by others still made him uneasy after so many years of solitude. As they left the medicine lodge, the village lay quiet under a star-filled sky. Most inhabitants had retired to their homes, though Lone Elk noted sentries positioned at intervals around the perimeter, people on guard against dangers both seen and unseen. Rainflower paused before they parted ways. Thank you, she said, simply, her eyes meeting his in the moonlight, for trusting me enough to leave your mesa, for helping my people, though they are not your own. Lone Elk considered his response carefully. Your people and mine were always connected, he said finally. I begin to believe my survival had purpose beyond my understanding. Perhaps this moment, this joining of our medicines against a common threat, is that purpose. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her tired face. Rest well, Lone Elk of the Ghost Band. Tomorrow we face our enemy together. As she turned toward her family's dwelling, Lone Elk watched her go, aware of a strange sensation in his chest, a lightness he had not experienced in 10 years. It felt dangerously close to Hope. Morning arrived with a soft golden light that belied the gravity of the day ahead. Lone Elk woke at first light, his body responding to habits formed through years of solitary vigilance. The guest dwelling provided. For him was small but comfortable, a single room with a sleeping platform, fire pit, and basic furnishings. Though he had slept under a roof surrounded by others for the first time in a decade, his rest had been surprisingly deep, his dreams untroubled. He performed his morning ritual, facing the rising sun, arms outstretched to welcome the day's energy. As he completed his prayers, a soft knock sounded at the dwelling's entrance. Enter, he called, lowering his arms. Rainflower stepped inside, carrying a small basket of food, freshly baked cornbread, dried berries, and a clay pot of herbal tea. She had changed into clean clothing, a simple buckskin dress decorated with river people patterns, her hair freshly braided and adorned with small turquoise beads. I thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the basket down near the fire pit. We have much to do today. Lone Elk nodded his thanks, noting the shadows beneath her eyes that suggested her night had been less restful than his own. How many are sick now? He asked directly, knowing she would have checked on her people first thing. 3 more fell. To the fever during the night, she replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion, including my cousin's youngest child. Stone Speaker says the progression is faster. Now the burning stage barely lasts a day before the cold sets in. They shared the simple breakfast, discussing the preparations for the evening's ritual. According to the slate paintings and Stone Speaker's interpretation, they would need to gather specific plants, prepare special medicines, and construct a ritual space according to precise specifications. Stone Speaker has called a council meeting. At midday, Rainflower explained, the elders and healthy adults will be told what we intend to do. Their support is crucial. The ritual requires the focused energy of the entire community. Will there be resistance? Lone Elk asked, aware that his presence as an outsider might complicate matters. Rainflower considered the question. Some may doubt. The joining of Ghost Band and River People medicine is unprecedented in living memory. But fear is a powerful motivator, and hope in short supply. She met his eyes directly. Your words will carry weight. You have seen what we faced before. After eating, they joined Stone Speaker at the medicine lodge. The old shaman had been working since before dawn, sorting through his extensive collection of herbs, roots, and ceremonial items, selecting those required for the countering ritual. The speaking stone has been prepared, he informed them, indicating a small black stone resting on a bed of sage in a carved wooden bowl. It has been washed in spring water and smoked with sacred herbs. It remembers its purpose. Lone Elk approached the stone respectfully, recognizing the craftsmanship of his mother's sister. The speaking stone was oval, about the size of a man's palm, polished to a high sheen with symbols etched into its surface spirals, zigzags, and handprints arranged in a pattern that formed a face when viewed from certain angles. May I? He asked, hands hovering above, but not touching the sacred object. Stone. Speaker nodded permission. Lone Elk carefully lifted the speaking stone, feeling an immediate connection, a subtle vibration that seemed to pass from the stone into his fingertips and up his arms. This was genuine Ghost Band medicine, imbued with the spiritual power of his ancestors. It recognizes your bloodline, Stone Speaker observed with satisfaction. This is good. The stone will respond more strongly to your voice during the ritual. They spent the morning preparing medicines according to the instructions from the slate paintings. Some ingredients were familiar to Lone Elk from his mother's teachings. Others were unique to the River People's pharmacopoeia. The combination created medicines unlike any he had worked with before. Powerful blends designed specifically to counter soul binding and release captured spirits. Rainflower moved with practiced efficiency, her hands quick and sure as she measured, ground, and mixed various substances. Lone Elk assisted where needed, following her instructions and adding Ghost Band elements at appropriate moments. Their working rhythm became almost musical, a seamless cooperation that required few words. As they worked, Rainflower shared more about her journey to becoming a healer. I was not yet 7 summers when the illness came, she began, grinding juniper berries with a stone mortar and pestle. My twin brother and I both fell sick on the same day. The fever was unlike anything the village had seen. It moved through our bodies like fire, then like ice. She paused, her hands continuing their steady work, even as her mind traveled back to that difficult time. For 7 days, we walked between worlds. The shaman said our spirits were untethered, neither fully here nor gone to the ancestor realm. On the 8th day, I returned. My brother did not. Lone Elk listened silently, recognizing the echo of what they had learned about the current fever spirits, unable to complete their journey to the ancestor world. When I recovered, I was changed, Rainflower continued. I could hear the songs of plants, feel the pain in others' bodies as if it were my own. Stone Speaker, who was already an elder then, said the spirits had marked me. She touched a small amulet hanging at her neck, a carved piece of deer antler, polished smooth by years of handling. This was my brother's. I wear it to remind me that my gift came at great cost. You believed your gift should have been his, Lone Elk said, understanding now what she had confronted in the seeing pool during the spirit walk. Or that I should have remained with him, wherever he went, she admitted quietly. For many years, I carried that guilt. The seeing pool showed me that our paths were always meant to diverge, his journey continuing in the spirit world, mine remaining here to heal others. Lone Elk nodded, seeing the parallel to his own experience in the spirit walk. We both carried burdens that were not truly ours to bear. And now we set them down to take up a different weight, Rainflower said, her eyes meeting his with shared understanding. By midday, the medicines were prepared, small pouches of healing mixtures, a special paint for marking participants in the ritual, a bitter tea to be consumed by those most recently afflicted with the fever. Stone Speaker approved each preparation with careful examination, sometimes adding final elements from his own secret knowledge. The council gathering took place in the village's central plaza, where all important community decisions were made. Elders sat in a semicircle on woven mats, their faces grave with concern and fatigue. Behind them gathered other adult members of the tribe, those not actively tending the sick or maintaining essential village functions. Stone Speaker opened the council with a formal invocation to the ancestors, asking for their wisdom and guidance. Then he introduced Lone Elk with full ceremonial language, honoring him as the last warrior of the Ghost Band and acknowledging the ancient connections between their peoples. When it was his turn to speak, Lone Elk stepped forward, conscious of the weight of every eye upon him. 10 years of solitude had left him unaccustomed to addressing groups, but the warrior training of his youth returned as he stood tall before the assembled river people. I come to you as the last of my band, he began, his deep voice carrying clearly across the plaza. For 10 years, I have lived apart, keeping the memory of my people alive through solitude and prayer. When your healer knelt at my door, I did not wish to leave my solitary vigil. He paused, looking at the faces before him, men and women whose loved ones were dying from a mysterious fever, whose community was being systematically destroyed, just as his had been a decade earlier. But the spirits had other plans, he continued. The journey your healer and I have taken revealed truths hidden for generations. The fever that takes your people is not natural sickness, but deliberate attack, dark medicine of the most forbidden kind. A murmur passed through the gathered tribe at these words. Lone Elk waited for silence before continuing. 10 years ago, my people were massacred. I believed it was the work of raiders seeking valuable items to sell. Now I understand it was something far more sinister, the first step in a ritual that now reaches completion with the binding of your people's spirits. He described what they had learned in the spirit walk, how an ancient evil practice was being revived, using the captured souls of the dying to increase a dark practitioner's power. As he spoke, he watched understanding and horror dawn on the faces before him. The one who orchestrates this was patient, Lone Elk explained, waiting for the proper star alignments, gathering the necessary elements over years or even decades. The massacre of my band was calculated to eliminate those who could oppose this ritual, those who held the knowledge of how to counter it. An elder raised his hand, requesting permission to speak. When Stone Speaker nodded, the old man asked the question surely on many minds. Why would anyone do this? What purpose does such evil serve? Power, Lone Elk answered simply. The binding of spirits grants unnatural power and extended life to the practitioner. Ancient stories tell of shadow shamans who lived for generations, by consuming the life force of others. Rainflower stepped forward then, holding up the slate paintings for all to see. "The old ones left us guidance," she explained. "Instructions for a countering ritual that must be performed tonight when the crescent moon stands over Thunder Mountain." She outlined the ritual requirements, the medicines they had prepared, the speaking stone's role, the need for freely given blood from both ghost band and river people lineages. Most importantly, she emphasized, we need the focused energy and belief of everyone in the village. Those too sick to participate actively must be included through proxy objects, something they have touched or created, representing their spirit in the ritual circle. The council listened with solemn attention as Stone Speaker added his own endorsement to the plan. When all had been explained, the head elder, a woman whose lined face spoke of many winters of leadership, rose to address the gathering. "Our people have always respected the balance between worlds," she said, her voice thin but strong. "If dark forces have disrupted this balance, it falls to us to restore it." She turned to Lone Elk with a formal gesture of respect. "We welcome thee, last warrior of the Ghost Band, and accept his aid in this time of need." With the council's blessing secured, preparations accelerated. A ritual space was cleared on a flat area near the river far, enough from the village to be safe if the ceremony attracted unwanted spiritual attention, but close enough for the sick to be brought if necessary. Throughout the afternoon, Lone Elk worked alongside river people men to construct the ritual circle according to the specifications shown in the slate paintings. Using white river stones, they created a large outer circle with an intricate pattern of inner circles and connecting lines. At key intersections, they dug small pits to hold ceremonial fires. Rainflower, meanwhile, visited each household affected by the fever. For those still in the burning stage, she administered the bitter tea prepared that morning. For those who had progressed to the cold stage, she collected personal items to represent them in the evening ritual hair, fingernail clippings, or cherished possessions as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the village. Final preparations were made. Stone Speaker summoned Lone Elk and Rainflower to the medicine lodge for the last and most solemn preparation, the creation of the blood offering that would power the countering ritual. The old shaman had prepared a special vessel, a bowl carved from lightning-struck wood, its interior lined with beeswax mixed with protective herbs. "The joining of your blood must be performed with sacred intent," he instructed. "Each of you will speak your purpose as the offering is made." Lone Elk extended his arm first. Using an obsidian blade purified in sacred smoke, Stone Speaker made a small, precise cut on the inside of his forearm. As blood welled from the wound and dripped into the wooden bowl, Lone Elk spoke the words that came from his heart. "I offer the blood of the Ghost Band, lost of a line unbroken since the beginning times. In memory of those who came before, in service to those who remain, I give this essence freely to break the bonds of dark medicine and release the captured spirits of the river people." When sufficient blood had been collected, Stone Speaker applied a healing paste to the wound and wrapped it with a clean cloth. Rainflower then extended her arm for the same procedure. As her blood joined Lone Elk's in the sacred vessel, she spoke her own words of purpose. "I offer the blood of the river people, healer marked by the spirits. For those who suffer, for those lost between worlds, I give this essence freely to counter the binding ritual and restore the proper flow between life and afterlife." Stone Speaker sealed her wound as well, then carefully mixed the combined blood with a cedar twig, adding 7 drops of an oil infused with protective herbs. "It is done," he said with satisfaction. "A vessel will remain here until the ritual begins at moonrise." As they left the medicine lodge, the village was alive with purposeful activity. Every able-bodied person had a role in the upcoming ceremony tending the sacred fires, drumming, singing, or simply lending their focused intention to the work. Those with young children were preparing them for the night's events, explaining the importance of their participation in terms they could understand. In the midst of this activity, Lone Elk found himself standing slightly apart, still not fully comfortable among so many after his years of solitude. Rainflower noticed his isolation and approached, carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. "For you," she said, offering him the package. "Traditional clothing for the ritual. Stone Speaker says you should wear the garb of your position, as ghost band warrior rather than travel clothes." Lone Elk unwrapped the bundle to find a beautifully crafted buckskin shirt and leggings, decorated with ghost band designs. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the materials of the highest quality. "These belong to Swift River," Rainflower explained. "He received them as a gift from your people many years ago and kept them in honor of that friendship. The designs mark the wearer as one worthy of respect among the ghost band." Touched by the gesture, Lone Elk ran his fingers over the intricate beadwork. "I will wear them with honor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and return them when our work is complete." "Keep them," Rainflower said simply. "They have waited for their proper owner." As she turned to leave, Lone Elk found himself reaching out to catch her hand. The gesture surprised them both. He had initiated physical contact rarely since their journey began. "Rainflower," he said, suddenly uncertain of the words he wished to speak. "If we succeed tonight—" She waited, her hand warm in his, her eyes questioning. "If we succeed," he tried again, "what happens after?" The question hung between them, layered with meanings neither was quite ready to articulate. Would he return to his solitary mesa? Would she resume her life among her people? Had their paths joined temporarily or permanently? "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Perhaps that is for the spirits to reveal when our current task is complete." Lone Elk nodded, accepting the wisdom in her response. They stood for a moment longer, hands still joined, before Rainflower gently withdrew to continue her preparations. Left alone, Lone Elk changed into the ceremonial clothing, feeling a strange sense of continuity as he donned the garments that connected him to both his own people and the river people through Swift River. The shirt fit as if made for him, the weight of its beaded decoration settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden as he stepped outside to join the gathering. Community. Lone Elk looked to the eastern sky, where the first stars were becoming visible in the deepening blue. Tonight would determine the fate of the river people, and perhaps his own future as well. For the first time in 10 years, that future seemed to hold possibilities beyond solitary remembrance. The last warrior of the ghost band walked toward the ritual circle, ready to fulfill the purpose that had preserved him when all others fell out. Purpose that now included a young healer whose courage had drawn him from isolation back into the complex, painful, beautiful world of human connection. Twilight deepened into true darkness as the village gathered at the ritual site. 7 small fires burned at strategic points within the stone circle, their flames barely moving in the still night air. Stone Speaker stood at the circle's center, the speaking stone and blood vessel positioned on a small altar of flat river rocks before him. Lone Elk took his place at the eastern point of the circle, as dictated by the ancient slate paintings. The ghost band ceremonial clothing felt foreign and familiar against his skin, a reminder of who he had been before solitude claimed him. Around his neck hung a small leather pouch containing red earth from Windy Mesa, connecting him to his 10-year vigil. The villagers arranged themselves around the outer circle, each holding a small bundle of sage or juniper. Those caring for the sick had brought the requested proxy items, personal possessions, imbued with the essence of those too ill to attend. These were placed at the western point of the circle, creating a spiritual bridge to the afflicted. Rainflower entered last, dressed in ceremonial white buckskin adorned with symbols of her healing status. Her hair hung loose down her back, woven with small white feathers and beads. In her hands, she carried a dark object that made Lone Elk tense with recognition, the shadow totem they had encountered in their camp. Another was placed at the village. "Spring this morning," she explained quietly as she passed him. "I found it while gathering water for the ceremony." Lone Elk's eyes narrowed. "A trap. The dark practitioner seeks to disrupt our ritual, or to mark us for later vengeance," Rainflower agreed grimly. "Stone Speaker has contained its influence, but its presence confirms we face opposition tonight." She continued to the northern point of the circle, placing the neutralized totem. On a bed of salt and ash rendered harmless, by providing a connection to their adversary, a tether they could follow back to its source dot as the crescent moon rose above Thunder Mountain. Stone Speaker raised his arms to begin the ceremony. His deep voice carried across the hushed gathering, first in the river people's language, then translated for Lone Elk's benefit. "We stand between worlds tonight, at the boundary of life and spirit. We seek to restore balance where dark forces have disrupted the natural order. We come to release those trapped between realms and to counter the binding that holds them." The old shaman lifted the speaking stone, its polished surface catching moonlight as he held it aloft. "This stone, crafted by ghost band hands, carried by river people hearts, will be our voice to the ancestor realm tonight." He placed the stone in the center of the altar and motioned for Lone Elk and Rainflower to approach. As they did, the air within the circle seemed to thicken, taking on a quality that made movements feel slower, more deliberate. Stone Speaker lifted the vessel containing their combined blood. "With freely given essence of both bloodlines, we break the bonds of dark medicine." He poured a portion of the mixture onto the speaking stone, which began to emit a subtle vibration, felt rather than heard. What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts would differ. The shadow totem on its bed of salt suddenly burst into flame, not the natural orange-yellow of ordinary fire, but a cold blue-black that consumed without heat. From this unnatural blaze rose a dark mist that coalesced into a vaguely human shape. "He comes," Stone Speaker shouted, raising protective hands. The binding force resists. The shadow figure lunged toward the altar, but Lone Elk was faster. He stepped between the apparition and the speaking stone, raising the ghost band war cry that had not been heard in 10 years. The shadow recoiled momentarily, then surged forward again with greater force. Rainflower's voice rose in a healing song, its pure tones cutting through the oppressive atmosphere like sunlight through storm clouds. The shadow wavered, caught between Lone Elk's physical blocking and the spiritual barrier of Rainflower's music. Stone Speaker seized this moment of disruption to complete the blood ritual, pouring the remaining mixture in a precise pattern around the speaking stone. As the final drop fell, the stone began to glow with an inner light that grew steadily brighter. The shadow shrieked, sound like wind through a mountain pass, and lunged once more, this time directly at Rainflower. Lone Elk moved without conscious thought, throwing himself into the path of the dark entity. The impact felt like plunging into icy water, cold penetrating to his bones as the shadow substance flowed around and through him. "Lone Elk!" Rainflower cried, her song faltering as she witnessed his collapse. "Continue," Stone Speaker commanded, his voice cutting through her distress. "The ritual must be completed, or all is lost." With visible effort, Rainflower resumed her healing song, though tears now streamed down her face. Stone Speaker's deeper voice joined hers, adding power and resonance to the counter-ritual. On the ground, Lone Elk struggled against the invasive cold that spread through his body. The shadow had entered him, seeking a vessel to replace the totem destroyed by the ritual. He felt consciousness slipping away, darkness closing in from the edges of his vision. With his last coherent thought, he reached for the pouch of mesa, earth around his neck, his connection to 10 years of prayer and remembrance. As his fingers closed around it, warmth bloomed in his palm, pushing back against the deadly cold of the shadow entity. Lone Elk floated in darkness, untethered from Fen. His body, the shadow entity, surrounded him like frigid water, seeking to consume his spirit as it had consumed so many others. Yet the warmth from the mesa earth created a protective barrier, thin but persistent, a flame refusing to be extinguished. From a great distance, he heard Rainflower's healing song. Her voice provided orientation in the formless void, a beacon to follow homeward. He struggled toward it, fighting the leaden weight of the shadow's presence. Outside, in the physical world, the ritual continued with desperate intensity. Rainflower knelt beside Lone Elk's rigid body, maintaining her healing song even as tears streamed down her face. His skin had taken on an unnatural pallor, his breathing shallow and ragged. The pouch of mesa earth, clutched in his hand, glowed with a faint reddish light, the only sign that he still fought against the invading entity. Stone Speaker worked with practiced urgency, applying sacred medicines to Lone Elk's forehead, chest, and palms. The shadow seeks a new vessel, he explained to the frightened onlookers. It cannot return to its master without one. Will it take him? Rainflower asked between verses of her song, her voice breaking. Not if his spirit fights, the old shaman replied. Not if he has reason to return. Around the circle, the villagers maintained their positions, many now chanting softly or drumming to reinforce the ritual's power. The speaking stone continued to glow at the center of the altar, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Stone Speaker turned to Rainflower with sudden decision. We must accelerate the ritual. Bring the healing crystals. She retrieved a small pouch from her ceremonial dress, extracting 3 translucent crystals that caught the firelight and broke it into rainbow patterns. These rare stones, found only in caves high in Thunder Mountain, were said to amplify spiritual energy and slow the progression of illness. Place them on his body, head, heart, and hand, Stone Speaker instructed. Then speak to his spirit directly. He may be lost in shadow realms, but your voice can reach him. Rainflower positioned the crystals as directed, then leaned close to Lone Elk's ear. Her song shifted to spoken words, intimate and urgent. Lone Elk of the Ghost Band, find your way back to us. Your journey is not complete. Your vow is not fulfilled. Her voice strengthened with each word. You survived for a purpose, and that purpose is not yet achieved. Return to us. Return to me. Within the shadow realm, Lone Elk heard her call. Her words created a path through the darkness, a thread he could follow. With each phrase she spoke, the warmth from the mesa earth spread further through his spirit, pushing back against the cold entity that sought to devour him. I am Lone Elk, he affirmed to himself, gathering strength from identity. Last warrior of the Ghost Band, I survived the massacre. I kept the memory of my people alive. I will not end here, consumed by the same darkness that took them. The shadow entity recoiled from his assertion, then attacked with renewed force. Images flooded Lone Elk's consciousness, his people dying, their blood soaking into the earth, their spirits crying out in anguish. The shadow used his deepest grief as a weapon against him, but something had changed in Lone Elk since the spirit walk, where once these images would have paralyzed him with guilt and sorrow. Now he recognized them for what they were: manipulations, designed to weaken his resolve. I honor my dead, he declared into the darkness, but I serve the living. With this affirmation, the mesa earth in his physical hand flared with sudden, brilliant light. The warmth spread throughout his body, driving the shadow entity before it like night, fleeing from dawn. In the ritual circle, the villagers gasped. As Lone Elk's body arched upward, a column of dark mist erupting from his mouth. The shadow entity, expelled from its intended vessel, writhed in the air above him. Stone Speaker was prepared. raising the speaking stone, now luminous with power. He spoke words in an ancient language that predated both ghost band and river people. The stone responded with a high, clear tone that cut through the night air like a blade. The shadow entity convulsed, its form destabilizing. The speaking stone's resonance continued to build, creating a frequency that disrupted the dark binding. At its core, with a final soundless scream, the entity disintegrated into particles that dissipated on the night breeze. Lone Elk collapsed back to the ground, drawing a deep, ragged breath. Rainflower caught him, cradling his head in her lap, her face transformed by relief and something deeper. "You returned," she whispered, brushing sweat-soaked hair from his forehead. "I heard you calling," he replied weakly. "I followed your voice home." Stone Speaker approached, the speaking stone still glowing in his hands. "The binding is broken," he announced. "But our work is not complete. The dark practitioner will feel the destruction of his projection. He will know we have countered his ritual, and he will come himself," Lone Elk said with certainty, struggling to sit up despite Rainflower's protests. "We have not defeated him, only his shadow. Rest now," Stone Speaker instructed. "The final confrontation will come soon enough, and you will need your strength." As the village erupted in cautious celebration around them, Lone Elk reached for Rainflower's hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for bringing me back." She entwined her fingers with his, the gesture speaking volumes that words could not yet express. "Always," she promised. "Whenever you are lost, I will find you." Dawn broke over the river people's village with a sense of cautious hope. Throughout the night, reports had come from households with fever victims. The burning had subsided, the unnatural cold retreated. Those in the earliest stages of illness were already showing signs of recovery, their spirits reconnecting with their bodies as the binding ritual's effects unraveled. Prayer flags hung throughout the village, strips of colored cloth bearing symbols of protection and healing, placed by families seeking spiritual aid for their loved ones. The gentle morning breeze set them fluttering, creating a visual symphony of movement and color against the adobe dwellings. Lone Elk stood at the edge of the village, watching the rising sun paint the eastern mountains gold. Though physically weakened by his battle with the shadow entity, he had insisted on taking a guard position at first light. His warrior's instincts told him danger still approached. The dark practitioner would not accept defeat without retaliation. Stone Speaker joined him, the old man's movements deliberate, but showing no sign of fatigue despite the night's exertions. "The fever continues to release its hold," he reported. "Even those furthest along have shown improvement. Their spirits are returning." "Good." Lone Elk nodded. "And the speaking stone?" "Resting," the shaman replied with a slight smile, as if speaking of a living being. "Its power was greatly diminished by the counter-ritual. It will need time to regain its strength." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both scanning the surrounding landscape with experienced eyes. The village occupied a defensible position, bordered by the river on one side and gentle slopes leading to higher ground on others. But both men knew that the coming threat was not merely physical. "You should rest as well," Stone Speaker finally said. "The shadow's touch has weakened you more than you admit." Lone Elk did not deny it. His encounter with the entity had left him drained, his spirit bruised from the battle. Yet rest seemed impossible with the sense of approaching danger prickling at his awareness. "Rainflower is asking for you," the old shaman added, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts on the growing connection between the two. This information changed Lone Elk's calculations. With a nod of acknowledgement to Stone Speaker, he turned back toward the village center. He found Rainflower at the Healing Lodge, a structure similar to, but smaller than the Medicine Lodge, dedicated specifically to treating the sick. Inside, several villagers lay on sleeping pallets, attended by family members who applied cool cloths to foreheads and offered sips of herbal tea. Rainflower moved among them, checking symptoms and offering encouragement. Though clearly exhausted, she maintained a calm, reassuring presence that visibly comforted both patients and caregivers. When she saw Lone Elk at the entrance, her face brightened momentarily before concern returned. "You should be resting," she scolded gently, approaching him. "As should you," he countered, noting the shadows beneath her eyes. She led him outside, where they could speak privately. "The healing progresses faster than I dared hope," she reported. "Even my little brother shows signs of improvement. His spirit is finding its way back." "The counter-ritual worked," Lone Elk confirmed. "But the danger is not past." Rainflower nodded soberly. "Stone Speaker says the dark practitioner will come himself now, that we have forced his hand." "Good," Lone Elk said with grim satisfaction. "Better to face an enemy directly than to fight shadows." They walked slowly through the village, both too restless for stillness despite their exhaustion. Villagers nodded respectfully as they passed, many offering words of gratitude to Lone Elk for his role in the ritual. He accepted their thanks awkwardly, uncomfortable with recognition after so many years of solitude. Near the central plaza, they encountered a group of children playing a game with painted stones. The sight stopped Lone Elk short. Their innocent laughter and carefree movements, a stark reminder of what had been at stake, what was still threatened. "This is what we protect," Rainflower said softly, following his gaze. "Not just lives, but the living of those lives." Lone Elk nodded, something long frozen within him, continuing to thaw at the simple truth of her words. For 10 years he had honored the dead. Now he found himself equally committed to the living. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a shout from the village perimeter. A young scout ran toward them, his expression urgent. "A stranger approaches from the east," he reported, breathlessly. "An old man walking alone. He carries a staff topped with ... The youth hesitated, his face reflecting confusion and fear. "Topped with what looks like a human hand." Rainflower gasped softly. Lone Elk's expression hardened into the warrior mask he had not worn in a decade. "Gather the elders," he instructed the scout. "Tell Stone Speaker the Shadow Walker comes." As the youth hurried to obey, Rainflower turned to Lone Elk. Could it be him, after all this time? The one who orchestrated my people's massacre and your village's sickness? Lone Elk's voice was cold with controlled rage. "Yes, the timing is too perfect to be coincidence." Stone Speaker arrived quickly, bringing the village's war chief and 2 other elders. "A man with a staff bearing a preserved hand," the old shaman confirmed grimly, "an unmistakable sign of the darkest medicine." "What do we do?" the war chief asked, hand already moving to the knife at his belt. "We meet him," Lone Elk said with quiet authority. "But not here, not among your people where he might do further harm." He pointed to a flat area beyond the village boundary. "There, where we can see him approach from all sides." Stone Speaker nodded approval. "A wise choice. Who should go?" "Myself," Lone Elk said immediately. "And you, Stone Speaker, as the village's spiritual protector." "And me," Rainflower added firmly. The ritual required elements from both our peoples. So too must this confrontation. Though visibly reluctant, Lone Elk did not argue. He had learned enough about Rainflower's determination to know she would not be dissuaded. Instead, he turned to the war chief. "Keep your warriors ready, but hidden. If this goes poorly, protect your people at all costs." As they prepared to meet the approaching threat, villagers gathered in doorways and along pathways, their faces reflecting the fear and hope of a community that had already endured too much suffering. Prayer flags fluttered above them like multicolored birds, carrying their collective prayers into the morning sky. They waited in silence on the flat ground beyond the village, Three figures standing firm against the approaching threat. Stone. Speaker had brought the speaking stone, now restored to its normal appearance, but still holding power from the night's ritual. Rainflower carried her medicine pouch and flute, tools of healing that might be needed in unexpected ways. Lone Elk stood slightly ahead of them, bow in hand, arrows ready at his side. The stranger approached unhurriedly, a solitary figure, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who fears no challenge. As he drew closer, details became visible. An old man, perhaps 70 winters, with a face deeply seamed by time and harsh elements. His hair hung in long white braids adorned with animal teeth and small bones. He wore a robe of black-dyed buckskin decorated with symbols that made Stone Speaker's eyes narrow in recognition. Most disturbing was the staff he carried, a length of polished dark wood topped with a preserved human hand, its fingers permanently arranged in a gesture of grasping. The hand had been treated with some substance that prevented decay while maintaining a lifelike appearance. Its skin stretched tight over clearly visible bones. The old man stopped 30 paces away, planting his macabre staff in the earth before him. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance, resonant and strong despite his apparent age. "So few to greet me," he observed, his tone almost conversational. "The last ghost band warrior, the river people's shaman, and a girl marked by the spirits. An interesting welcome party." "You are not welcome here, Shadow Walker," Stone Speaker replied formally. "Your dark medicine has been countered. The spirits you bound are returning to their rightful vessels." The old man's face showed no surprise at this declaration. "Temporary setbacks," he said with a dismissive gesture. "The binding was nearly complete. What has been done once can be done again, with greater care." His gaze shifted to Lone Elk, eyes narrowing with interest. "You proved more resilient than expected, Ghost Band. When my raiders left you for dead among your people, I thought the threat of your bloodline eliminated." His thin lips curved in something approximating a smile. "A miscalculation I have waited 10 years to correct." The confirmation of his involvement in the massacre sent a surge of cold rage through Lone Elk's body. This was the architect of his people's destruction, the force behind a decade of grief and solitude. "You orchestrated the attack on my band," Lone Elk stated, his voice deadly calm. "Not for their possessions, but for their knowledge. To eliminate those who could counter your ritual." "The Ghost Band were guardians of old wisdom," the Shadow Walker acknowledged with a slight nod, "as were their ancestors before them. Their medicine contained keys to doorways between worlds that I required." He gestured to the staff with its grisly topper. "Your mother's hand proved particularly useful. As the band's principal healer, her essence opened pathways others could not access." Lone Elk's knuckles whitened on his bow, but he maintained his composure. "You gave her no warrior's death, no proper passage to the ancestor realm. Death is merely a transition I control." The old man replied, "Your mother's spirit has served me well these 10 years, as have the others from your band. Soon, the river people would have joined them, a considerable addition to my spiritual resources." Rainflower stepped forward, anger overcoming caution. "You speak of people's souls as if they were possessions to be collected." The Shadow Walker's attention shifted to her, his expression calculating. "The marked healer. My shadow touched you briefly during the ritual. Your spirit has unusual resilience. Ah, quality worth preserving." He extended a hand in invitation. "Join me instead of opposing me. I can teach medicines your river people shaman has never imagined." "I have seen enough of your medicine," Rainflower replied coldly. "It brings only suffering and death." "Suffering and death are inevitable," the old man countered. "I nearly harness their power instead of fearing it." His gaze swept over the three of them. "You cannot stop what I have set in motion. The star alignments favor my working for 3 more nights. ample time to rebind the spirits you temporarily released. Stone Speaker raised the speaking stone, holding it before him like a shield. You will not touch these people again, Black Raven. The use of this name visibly startled the Shadow Walker. His composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of genuine emotion surprise, followed quickly by anger. That name no longer has power over me, old man, he snarled. I abandoned it when I embraced the shadow path. Yet it remains your true name, Stone Speaker pressed. Given by your mother, connected to your original spirit, before you turned to Forbidden's knowledge. The Shadow Walker Black Raven straightened, regaining his composure. Names are just sounds. Power is what matters. He lifted his staff slightly, and the preserved hand at its top seemed to flex impossibly. I came to offer terms. Surrender the speaking stone and the last ghost band blood, and I will spare the rest of your village. We refuse, Lone Elk stated. Flatly. Your dark path ends here? Black Raven's eyes narrowed. Then you have chosen the difficult way. With a sudden movement, he struck his staff against the ground 3 times. The sound echoed unnaturally, continuing longer than it should have. From behind him, previously hidden by distance and mourning, haze, 5 figures emerged, men wearing the distinctive black headbands of the Shadow Band, their faces painted with ash in ritualistic patterns. You thought yourselves hunted in Shadow Canyon? Black Raven asked with cold amusement. My apprentices merely tracked you, waiting for this moment. He pointed his staff toward the village. Kill them all. Bring me the Ghost Band warrior alive. As the warriors advanced, Lone Elk knocked an arrow and drew his bow in one fluid motion. Run, he ordered Rainflower and Stone Speaker. Warn the village. But before anyone could move, a sudden movement from the left flank caught everyone by surprise. A warrior of the river people broke from concealment, bow already drawn. His arrow flew true, striking Black Raven in the shoulder. The dark practitioner staggered backward, his face contorting with shock and rage. Kill them, he shrieked. As chaos erupted across the open ground dot, the skirmish erupted with sudden violence. River people warriors emerged from hidden positions around the meeting ground, proving the war chief had disobeyed Lone Elk's instruction to remain in the village. Black Raven's apprentices charged forward, wielding stone clubs and bone knives. With practiced skill, Lone Elk's first arrow found its mark in the chest of the closest Shadow Band warrior. His second struck another in the thigh, not a killing blow, but enough to slow the man's advance. Then there was no more time for archery, as the remaining 3 closed the distance. Get to the village, Lone Elk shouted to Rainflower and Stone Speaker, drawing his knife and moving to intercept the attackers. The old shaman grabbed Rainflower's arm, pulling her toward safety, but she resisted. I won't leave him, she insisted, freeing herself from Stone Speaker's grip. From her medicine pouch, she withdrew a handful of fine powder and waited for her moment. Lone Elk fought with the fluid grace of a warrior born, his decade of isolation having done nothing to dull the combat skills instilled since childhood. He ducked beneath a swinging club, slashed upward with his knife, spun to avoid another attacker. Blood bloomed on buckskin as his blade found flesh, but he too received wounds, a glancing blow to his shoulder, a shallow cut along his ribs. River people warriors engaged the remaining Shadow Band members. The 2 groups locked in desperate combat across the open ground. Above the sounds of struggle rose a different noise, Black Raven's voice chanting in an ancient tongue, the words seeming to distort the air around him. Despite his arrow wound, the dark practitioner had recovered enough to begin a ritual. He raised his grotesque staff, the preserved hand at its top beginning to glow with an unnatural light. The earth beneath their feet trembled slightly, and the morning sky darkened as if heavy clouds had suddenly gathered. Stone Speaker recognized the danger immediately. He summons spirit forces, the old shaman warned. We must stop the chant. Before it completes, Rainflower seized her opportunity. As one of the shadow band warriors broke through the fighting to approach Lone Elk from behind, she threw her powder directly into the man's face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes, momentarily blinded by the mixture of irritating herbs. Lone Elk dispatched his current opponent with a decisive thrust, then turned to face the new threat. Seeing the blinded warrior stumbling about, he quickly understood Rainflower's intervention and finished the man with a swift, clean strike. Their eyes met across the battlefield, his filled with both gratitude and frustration at her refusal to retreat to safety, hers unwavering in her commitment to stand with him. There was no time for words as the fighting continued around them. Black Raven's chanting grew louder, the unnatural darkness spreading outward from where he stood. The glow from his staff intensified, the preserved hand now seeming to move independently, fingers flexing as if still attached to a living arm. The ceremonial drum? Stone Speaker called to Rainflower. We must counter his rhythm. Understanding. Immediately, Rainflower ran to where a small drum had been left at the edge of the meeting ground brought for the peace talk that never materialized. She began a rapid, syncopated beating that clashed deliberately with Black Raven's chanting rhythm. The effect was immediate. The dark practitioner faltered, his words stumbling as the drum's vibrations disrupted the careful cadence of his spell. The glow from his staff flickered, the hand's movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Seeing his advantage, Lone Elk broke away from his current fight and charged directly toward Black Raven. The dark practitioner saw him coming and redirected his staff, sending a bolt of shadowy energy toward the approaching warrior. Lone Elk dove aside, the dark energy scorching the earth where he had stood a moment before. He rolled to his feet and continued his advance, more cautiously now, aware of the staff's ranged power. Stone Speaker joined Rainflower at the drum, adding his voice in a counter-chant that further disrupted Black Raven's ritual. The old shaman held the speaking stone before him, and it began to glow in response to his words, its light a warm counterpoint to the sickly illumination of the staff. Frustrated by the interference, Black Raven abandoned his complex ritual for a more direct approach. He pointed his staff at Rainflower and Stone Speaker, focusing his malevolent will. Silence them. He commanded the remaining shadow band warriors. 2 apprentices broke away from their river, people opponents, and rushed toward the drummers. Lone Elk, seeing the new threat, changed direction to intercept them. He reached the first attacker from behind, his knife finding the gap between shoulder blades with deadly precision. The second shadow band warrior reached Stone Speaker, swinging a stone club at the old shaman's head. Stone Speaker ducked with surprising agility for his age, but stumbled and fell. Before the warrior could strike again, Rainflower threw herself between them, still clutching the drum. No. Lone Elk shouted, too far away to intervene, as the club descended toward Rainflower's unprotected head. In that moment, Rainflower raised the drum as her only shield. The club struck it with tremendous force, shattering the drum frame, but absorbing the blow that would have killed her. The impact still knocked her backward into Stone Speaker, both falling in a tangle of limbs. Lone Elk reached the shadow band warrior before he could attack again, his rage lending him speed and strength beyond normal human limits. His knife found the man's throat, ending the threat in a spray of crimson. A cry of anguish drew everyone's attention. On the far side of the battlefield, Black Raven stood with his staff raised high, his remaining apprentice dead at his feet, sacrificed by his own master's hand. The dark practitioner had opened the man's chest with a ceremonial blade, blood flowing freely into the dry earth. Blood powers the greatest medicine, Black Raven's voice carried across the suddenly quiet battlefield. Even the blood of allies when necessity demands. The sacrifice had immediate effect. The staff's glow intensified tenfold, the preserved hand fully animated now, reaching toward the sky with grasping fingers. The ground trembled more violently, and the unnatural darkness condensed around Black Raven like a living shroud. He creates. A portal, Stone Speaker gasped, struggling to his feet with Rainflower's help. A doorway to escape through the shadow realm. Lone Elk, understanding the dark practitioner must not be allowed to escape, charged forward in a final desperate attack. Black Raven saw him coming and smiled a terrible, triumphant expression. The staff swung down to point directly at Lone Elk's heart. "Join your mother in my service," Black Raven intoned as shadow energy gathered at the staff's tip, ready to strike. Time seemed to slow as shadow energy gathered at the tip of Black Raven's staff, a writhing darkness poised to strike. Lone Elk continued his charge, knowing he couldn't evade but refusing to surrender. If this was his end, he would meet it as a warrior of the Ghost Band facing his enemy, not fleeing Dot in that suspended moment. Rainflower's voice cut through the unnatural silence. Not speaking, but singing a healing song of such pure tone that it seemed to physically part the shadows gathering around Black Raven. The dark practitioner flinched, his concentration broken, just as he released the deadly energy. The shadow bolt went wide, missing Lone Elk by inches. Taking advantage of the momentary disruption, Lone Elk closed the final distance and tackled Black Raven to the ground. The impact sent the staff flying from the old man's grasp, landing several paces away with the preserved hand still glowing and twitching. They grappled in the dust. Lone Elk's youth and strength matched against Black Raven's desperate cunning and surprising vigor. The dark practitioner fought with unnatural power, his thin frame belying the force behind his blows. He chanted broken, phrases between gasps for breath, each word causing Lone Elk's skin to burn where they touched. "Your mother's spirit will watch you die," Black Raven taunted, his fingers clawing for Lone Elk's throat. "Then you will join her in eternal service." Lone Elk slammed the older man's head against the hard ground, momentarily stunning him. "My mother's spirit walks the star path," he growled. "Your lies cannot touch her now." Breaking free of the grapple, Lone Elk rolled toward his fallen knife. Black Raven recovered quickly, scrambling toward his staff with desperate intensity. Both men reached their weapons simultaneously. Across the battlefield, Stone Speaker had retrieved the speaking. Stone, holding it high as he chanted counter-medicine to weaken Black Raven's power. Rainflower continued her healing song, moving cautiously closer to the confrontation, her voice providing strength to Lone Elk and disruption to the dark practitioner's magic. Black Raven regained his staff and immediately swung it in a wide arc, creating a barrier of shadow energy between himself and his attackers. Behind this barrier, he began a new incantation, his words coming faster now, edged with desperation. "He still attempts to open a portal," Stone Speaker warned. "If he escapes to the shadow realm, he can return stronger at a time of his choosing." Lone Elk searched for a way through the shadow barrier, testing its edges with his knife, only to have the blade pass through harmlessly while his hand was repelled. Physical weapons could not penetrate this spiritual defense. "The bow," Rainflower called, pointing to Lone Elk's fallen weapon nearby. "Use your father's bow." Understanding flashed between them. The bow had belonged to Strongbow, Lone Elk's father and the Ghost Band's previous war leader. It carried generations of spiritual connection, consecrated in rituals throughout its creation, and used. Lone Elk retrieved the bow and his last arrow. Behind the shadow barrier, Black Raven's chanting reached a crescendo, the air around him beginning to ripple like heat waves above summer stone. The portal was forming. "It must be empowered," Stone Speaker called urgently. "The arrow needs the combined medicine." Rainflower raced to Lone Elk's side, still maintaining her healing song. From her medicine pouch, she took a small vial of the blood mixture from the previous night's ritual, ghost band, and river people essence combined. With quick, practiced movements, she coated the arrowhead with a precious liquid. Stone speaker approached, touching the speaking stone to the arrow shaft. The stone flared with warm light. It transferred to the arrow, running along its length in spiraling patterns. "For our peoples," Rainflower said, meeting Lone Elk's eyes with complete trust. "For the living and the dead," he replied, knocking the arrow and drawing the bowstring to his cheek. The bow, his father's bow. The ghost band's legacy felt alive in his hands, responding to his touch as if eager for this moment. Lone Elk took a deep breath, aligning body, bow, and spirit as his father had taught him so many years ago. "Mother, guide my hand," he whispered, and released. The arrow flew true, its trajectory marked by a trail of light that cut through Black Raven's shadow barrier as if it were morning mist. The dark practitioner looked up from his ritual, just in time to see death approaching. His eyes widened in shock and recognition as the arrow struck him squarely in the chest. Black Raven staggered backward, the staff falling from his grasp. He looked down at the shaft protruding from his body with an expression of disbelief. "Impossible," he gasped. "The shadow path grants immortality." "No path grants immortality," Stone Speaker replied gravely. "Only different journeys after death." The dark practitioner fell to his knees, black blood seeping around the arrow embedded in his chest. The half-formed portal behind him began to collapse, its energies dissipating like smoke in strong wind. As his life ebbed, something extraordinary happened. The preserved hand atop his staff began to crumble, decades of dark magic finally releasing its hold on the physical remains. "Look," Rainflower whispered, pointing to the air above the disintegrating hand. A faint luminescence had appeared, a vaguely human shape that gradually resolved into the translucent figure of a woman. Her features were similar to Lone Elk's, her bearing dignified despite the ordeal her spirit had endured. She looked directly at her son, a smile of recognition and peace transforming her ethereal face. "Mother," Lone Elk breathed, his voice catching. The spirit nodded once, her form already beginning to fade as she turned away from the physical world. Other translucent figures appeared briefly around her, the spirits of the ghost band, finally released from their binding, free to complete their journey to the ancestor realm. As Black Raven collapsed entirely, his body seeming to age decades. In moments, the spirits rose skyward in a column of soft light. The last to depart was Lone Elk's mother, who reached out one ethereal hand toward her son in blessing, before joining the others in their ascent to the star path. The battlefield fell silent, save for the wind rustling through spring grasses. The shadow barrier had vanished with Black Raven's death, leaving behind only scorched earth to mark where dark magic had temporarily held sway. Lone Elk stood motionless, bow still in hand, watching the sky where the spirits had disappeared. A decade of grief, purpose, and solitude culminated in this moment of resolution. His people freed, his mother's spirit released, his vow fulfilled in ways he could never have anticipated. Rainflower approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. No words were needed between them as they stood together, gazing upward at the clear morning sky where clouds were beginning to disperse, allowing sunlight to reclaim the land. Days blended into weeks as the River People village recovered from the shadow of Black Raven's dark medicine. Those who had suffered from the fever regained their strength gradually, their spirits once more firmly anchored to their bodies. Families reunited with loved ones who had hovered at death's edge. Children's laughter returned to the central plaza, a sound sweeter than any ceremonial drum. Lone Elk remained among them through this healing time, finding himself drawn into the rhythm of community life in ways that both comforted and disquieted him. After 10 years of solitude, the constant presence of others still occasionally overwhelmed his senses, sending him to quiet spots along the riverbank, where he could gather his thoughts and center his spirit. During these moments of solitary reflection, he often found himself contemplating the path forward. His vow of isolation had been fulfilled in unexpected ways. His people's spirits were freed. The dark practitioner who had orchestrated their deaths was himself dead, his shadow magic dispelled. The purpose that had sustained Lone Elk through a decade of lonely vigilance was complete. Yet he lingered, unable or perhaps unwilling to return to Windy Mesa and his solitary existence. Rainflower was the unspoken reason. In the aftermath of battle, their connection had deepened beyond words. They worked together daily, combining their healing knowledge to treat those still recovering from the fever's effects. Their hands would brush while preparing medicines, their eyes meet across firelit gatherings, their conversations extend long into evening hours. Neither spoke directly of what grew between them, as if naming it might somehow break its delicate formation. On the 20th day after Black Raven's defeat, Stone Speaker summoned them both to the Medicine Lodge. The old shaman had aged visibly during the ordeal, the expenditure of spiritual energy taking physical toll. Yet his eyes remained sharp, his mind clear as he addressed them. "The Union blanket has been prepared," he announced without preamble, gesturing to a beautifully crafted textile laid carefully on his ceremonial platform. Its intricate design combined patterns from both Ghost Band and River People traditions, woven together in a harmonious whole. Lone Elk and Rainflower exchanged startled glances. The Union blanket was a sacred object used in bonding ceremonies, joining of two people from different bands or tribes. "Elder," Lone Elk began carefully, "we have not spoken of, not to me, perhaps." Stone Speaker interrupted with a knowing smile, "but to each other in 1,000 unspoken ways." His weathered hand touched the blanket gently. "This was begun before either of you were born. Swift River and your mother's sister started its weaving when they foresaw the eventual joining of our peoples." Rainflower stepped closer to the blanket, her fingers hovering above its intricate surface. "I remember my grandfather working on this," she said softly. "He never explained its purpose. Some paths reveal themselves only when the travelers are ready to walk them," Stone Speaker replied. He fixed Lone Elk with a penetrating gaze. "The Ghost Band need not end with you, last warrior. Their wisdom, their blood, their spirit can continue." The implication hung in the air between them, neither uncomfortable nor unwelcome, simply unnamed until this moment. "I must return to Windy Mesa," Lone Elk said finally. "There are rituals to complete, farewells to make." Rainflower's face showed momentary disappointment before understanding dawned. "The decade-long vigil deserves proper conclusion," she agreed. "Your ancestors must be told of their freedom." "I would not go alone," Lone Elk added, his eyes meeting hers directly. "If you would accompany me." Her smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. "I would be honored to walk that path with you." 3 days later, they departed the River People village amid blessings and gifts from the grateful community. Stone Speaker performed a simple ceremony before their leaving, wrapping their hands together with a cord woven from the same threads as the Union blanket, not a formal bonding, but a recognition of their joined path. The journey to Windy Mesa took 4 days, following the now familiar route through Shadow Canyon. The sacred places they had encountered on their first journey seemed changed, peaceful rather than challenging, as if acknowledging the balance they had restored to the spiritual landscape. When they crested the final rise and Lone Elk's dwelling came into view, the bone wind chimes rattled in welcome, though no breeze stirred the air. Rainflower noticed, but made no comment, respecting the Ghost Band spirits that still maintained connection to this place. Lone Elk performed the farewell rituals, methodically cleansing the dwelling, offering thanks to the Mesa spirits, gathering the few possessions that held true meaning. The rest he left as offerings, acknowledging that this chapter of his life was complete. On their final evening atop Windy Mesa, they sat together watching sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The union blanket wrapped around their shoulders against the growing chill. They spoke of possibilities, a new dwelling that would combine elements of both their traditions, children who would carry forward the medicine knowledge of two peoples, journeys to share their combined healing with other bands. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Lone Elk reached for Rainflower's hand. 10 years I lived with ghosts, he said quietly, bound by grief and memory as surely as my people were bound by dark medicine. And now? She asked, her fingers interlacing with his. Now I choose life, he replied simply. I honor my dead by how I live, not by how I separate myself from living. Rainflower's smile in the starlight was answer enough. Tomorrow they would descend the mesa together, returning to her people who were gradually becoming his people as well. The bone wind chimes would continue their rattling conversation with the spirits, but Lone Elk, last warrior of the ghost band, keeper of their medicine ways, would carry their legacy forward in flesh and blood rather than solitary remembrance. The Apache warrior who had lived alone for 10 years had found, in the young woman who knelt at his door, not just healing for a village, but healing for his own wounded spirit, and a future neither could have imagined when their journey began.